Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 103rd live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing the history, albeit the very brief history, of metatext, as well as what we think about it, what I have used it for in High Point, and what Kage thinks about it for the Cineverse and the greater D&D lore. But first, we have some exciting updates, kind of exciting updates. So yeah, let's just kind of jump into some soft updates here while we just let everyone trickle in. What's up, my dude? How was your week?
Shalom. It was all right. It was very active, very busy. Had too much going on. As you do. One of my favorite things to do is nothing, right? And whenever I can do that, I feel like I got everything I need to take care of done, and we're good. I can do nothing for a little bit, but I don't have too much nothing time this week, so we'll make it up this weekend.
Yeah, that's how I felt last weekend. I took 5 days off because I had 5 days because we had the holiday. On Thursday.
That's true.
I ended up taking Friday off, had the weekend, and then Monday, I already get every other Monday off, so I had a whole 5-day weekend. I spent the entire weekend working on the back room.
That's right.
Pictures posted in Discord if you guys want to go check that out.
Very cool looking stuff.
So, yeah, and then I went back to work all week, and I don't know, work's easy right now, but it's just, I don't know. Maybe I just didn't sleep a lot this week. I think that was it. I was exhausted. Fair. It's like I'm trying to say. I wanted to say I was stumbling there because I wanted to say that work was just a big work week, but it's it really wasn't in the grand scheme of things. We had some issues where some of our systems went down, so that's just frustrating and yes, delays things. But otherwise, I don't know. It was just an exhausting week, but not necessarily because I did a lot. It was just an exhausting week.
Yeah.
So
it do be like that sometimes.
Yeah. But yeah. So we do have some exciting updates. So guys, we've been talking a lot about trying to reach affiliate, and we are just we are right there.
Centimeters, man.
We are
last leg of
we are right there. The problem that we're running into right now is Twitch is playing the dumb game. So all last month we were absolutely killing it with the concurrent viewership. You guys were showing up and you guys were representing, which was absolutely amazing. Oh my gosh. Mute myself. I did not realize that I was just going to be talking. But no, you guys are absolutely awesome. You guys showing up and representing was so phenomenal. All last month, we were 3.1, 3.2 concurrent viewers. We had to stay at 3. Everything was going fantastic. Right, the same stream that we hit 50 viewers or 50 followers, which is what we needed to be for affiliate, I dropped to 1.98. No, 2.98. 2.98. And it was okay, that's fine. I probably had that one bad stream. And then we had a killer stream last week. Last Friday was a killer stream. Had some new followers. We gained 5 followers. We went from 3 weeks of nothing, barely scraping, to 50 followers on stream number 100, like you called it. By the way, I owe you that beer, so here's that beer I owe you.
Cheers to that.
But at the same time, guys, we had just scraped by. I mean, we had such a hard time scraping to that 50 followers, and Twitch took away the concurrent viewers. But then last week, it just totally flipped on us because that next stream, we got 5 new followers. That random group that just showed up out of nowhere was just awesome. Dropped us 5 followers, and then I just kind of bounced, which was kind of cool. I'm still confused on where they came from. I got to imagine they knew each other. It felt like a group, yes, but we didn't get raided.
That's what was weird because normally it'll show up if we get raided. It'll say something.
I have an announcement, and it would have shown up on the mod side. I am so confused on where those people came from, but
crazy.
Why would 5 random people, but that interactive? That's why I thought we were getting trolled, especially with the echo part.
Yeah,
but
we went back and looked, and I don't.
So yeah, I couldn't find. So yeah, I don't know if any of you guys were here last Friday or saw that last stream. Yeah, we had these people come in towards the end, and they started complaining about an echo. We reviewed the footage. Absolutely no echo going on. Weird. But I will say this though, they did say that you were the one echoing, which I thought was weird.
Yes.
But I did notice earlier that I did have some cabling issues with my amplifier.
Okay.
Or the mixer.
Remote that episode.
Yeah.
Too.
So that's what I said. They said that you were
weird.
Yeah. So I don't know why they said that you were echoing, but I know that I was having issues that I had to fix before you came over. So I'm wondering if there was an issue. I just don't know why we can't see it on the recording.
Yeah.
I don't know why that would have happened live. Maybe it was there. Again, I think we might have been getting trolled. Who knows?
Whatever. They followed anyways. Let's go.
Like I said, hey, I got one of the best compliments I ever got, though. I got called Dollar Store Thor.
Dollar Store Thor. And you got Dollar Store Kendrick Lamar.
I mean, hey, you know what? I'll take it. You know, I'm fine with that.
I'm here for it.
But yeah, so this is where we are, y'all. With affiliate, we have 55 followers. We are solid. We are solid on stream time. We are solid on days of the month. Right now, we are sitting at a absolute staggering 2.57. So Twitch has just continued to twist the knife on this because it's over a 30-day period, right? So all last month we were killing it, but because the best days have now dropped off and we have a couple bad days, like I think I had a bad Sunday and then the last 2 Mondays were a little bit on the low side for stream for viewership. So I think those 3 days have skewed the numbers. So we're digging our way back. So we're not quite there at affiliate, but we have basically met all of the marks. It's basically just it's a waiting game. It's a waiting game to make sure that the stats go back into our favor, getting 3 concurrent viewers, and once we have that, it'll trigger over, which kind of comes up to our next updates of what is that going to mean. Well, we've talked about this quite a bit. Some of the things we're going to keep behind the veil because we want some things to be a surprise. But we have been thinking a lot about the channel points. We have been thinking of some unique things. We do want to hear from you guys in the community about the things you would like to see in our channel points. Like, what would you, if you're sitting there watching us, what would you like to be able to do? What kind of interactions you want? You know, we're thinking about an AMA, option to where you can buy an AMA for Kage or myself, depending on the stream, if he's here. And then that way, we can kind of do a pause and then we can, do a side question that's maybe non-D&D related or something else like that.
No doubt.
We were thinking about... I'm definitely looking forward to doing a gaming with chat. So I'm developing...
Cool.
I'm developing a way to where I can run a campaign where one of the playing characters, like maybe Kage, maybe I'll get Vixie here, will be playing their own characters, or it'll just be a one-on-one with me as the DM and one playing character, but that playing character being controlled by chat. And I'm working on how we want to do that, integrate that, but it would be really nice to where we could do a system where you use the channel points to vote on the action, and based on how many people have, voted, it will, take the average or something like that. So I really like the idea of doing a gaming with chat. I like the idea of, not so much, I don't want to get into any realm of gambling, but if anybody follows gaming streamers, one of the Twitch streamers that I follow, Insum, he does a lot of horror game streams.
Okay.
But one thing I really like that he does is one of the games that he has is he plays it a lot. It's called Phasmophobia. And you basically do a ghost hunt. You have to get evidence to eventually discover what ghost is haunting the house. And that's essentially it in a nutshell. Very there's so much more to it.
Very much
but
more in depth.
Essentially, go into the house. You have a bunch of equipment that you can bring in. You have to just basically spend enough time there to get enough evidence to then decide this is the type of ghost I'm coming after. And there's 12, 13 different types. So, and each one of them have 3 different evidences. It's a whole thing. Okay. But one of the things that I really like, one thing that he does every now and again with his audience is he does a what does he call it? I forget, he doesn't do titles a lot, specific things. It's just an event that he does. Mm-hmm. But essentially, when people watch his stream, I think it's through his channel points, or I don't know if he has a bot, but they essentially earn a currency kind of. And what they can do is they allow him, what he'll do is he'll set up a betting to where he'll spin a wheel of all of the ghost types. Mm-hmm. And whichever one it lands on, the chat will vote whether or not the spinner has it right. So it's the believers versus the doubters is what he calls it. Okay. I don't think he has a title for the event, but when he does it, it's basically believers and doubters, right? So he'll spin the wheel and it'll be the wheel says it's going to be an Oni this mission. So then he'll give everyone like 2 minutes, and they have a vote. I need to look into more how he does it, but basically I think it's their channel points. They basically bet their channel points on whether or not it's going to be yes or no. And then he plays the game. Once they figure out what the ghost type was, one side will win, and he's able to like reimburse them. Again, I don't think it's channel points, because I know that Twitch is really weird about like you can't exchange things for value. So I don't know if this is something that's like a bot that just has a fictitious number system where it's a currency, or if it's tied into channel points. I don't know.
Interesting.
I know channel points can be used for raffles, so or things like that, where you basically buy in a channel point and then can do something. So again, if we want to do like if we want to do a custom gaming session, we could basically like invite chat to do something with us, and then again you can like spend channel points. Like for every 100 channel points, you put in a ticket, and then it'll basically be randomly selected. So the more tickets you have, the more likely you are selected. Those are some of the ideas that we have that we're trying to come up with. So we want to hear about what you guys are really interested in. I mean, obviously, eventually we'll get into things like giveaways, but we want to hear about what you guys are interested in to see with channel points. And additionally, we are also talking in discussions about what we want to do with subs. So as people really want to support us and help us along the way, we want to give back and we want to recognize people, right? It's one thing to get a sub and get a notification, or just, get a sort of icon for it. But we really want to also show our appreciation for those that are supporting us and then helping us along the way as well. So we want to, we are looking into we are looking into options for Discord for what we can do there. Like maybe monthly or so gaming sessions that will be with like subs only or sub only YouTube content. So we're thinking about doing like interviews. What's going on, Cosmic? Like we'll do interviews. So maybe like in the Discord we'll have like sub only interviews where we'll have them in a private chat. We'll record it, and then we can make a YouTube video out of that. Subs can help, but we also want to get subs involved. What I would really like to do is, as we start making more content, I want to have these subs more involved with helping us like kind of get ideas out, right? Like if I have a couple episodes that I want to pull out or push out, but I'm not sure like what order, it would be really nice to have like a channel where I could like post like the 3 samples and be like, hey, subs, which one should be posted first, right? That would be really cool. It'd be kind of nice, like, just, I don't know, some way for the subs to kind of like give us more feedback than just the community, like be more involved in the development. Yeah. So yeah, we're really trying to figure out what we can do with subs other than just say thank you and you have more emotes, because of course the emotes are fun and everything.
Love me some emotes, got to.
But yeah, I would really like to figure out what we can do to make subs feel more appreciated. So again, more ideas, we want to see that.
Oh yeah, posted in our ideas in the Discord.
But other than that, emotes are just I'm kind of relieved that I didn't hit affiliate that quickly, because emotes are just money. Emotes are expensive. Our digital artists are not cheap.
True.
I mean, please, excuse me, deservedly so. Absolutely deservedly so.
Of them got
the ones that I'm looking at, I'm 100%. If I get if the samples that I'm looking at are what they can deliver with the things that are in my head, like if what I want can be done in their art style,
yes,
worth every penny.
Yes,
and I will tip very heavily.
I mean, hell yeah.
But yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yes.
Speaking of content, y'all. So I will say this: I'm a little bit behind with the editing, but I'll tell you why. Not only did I spend 5 days working on the Misfit Tavern, which is the back room game and bar room that I'm building. Photos in the Discord if you want to see the current state. I'm building a cave wall as an accent wall. So that's first time I've ever doing that, but that's a lot of fun. But I spent all weekend doing that, so I did not get to editing at all. But I have been looking into videos and teaching myself. So thing is, this week, I finally get some downtime after I'm done with all my time off. I go to get Adobe Premiere Pro. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to sign up. I'm going to buy it just because I really want to get into this. So I get the program. I get everything set up. Or, I buy it, get everything set up. start to download it on Tuesday, so I can finally actually get my hands in there, right? I've been doing a lot of, I've been watching a lot of videos, trying to figure out like what I need to do, get myself familiar with everything. Because yes, I learn better with hands-on if I have someone there teaching me. But if it's something this complicated, it's more of like immersion. It's better for me to watch someone explain it a couple times and have multiple people explain it. So I'm like, once I open it up, I'm already comfortable and familiar with at least where the basics are, because then I can actually start to work with it, right? So that's what I've been basically doing, and I get it on Tuesday. I try to get it downloaded. I'm having issues. They have this thing called like Creative Cloud. It's like, dude, Adobe, I don't know if you've been following the news. Adobe's trashed right now. Like products are fine. Like the products do what the products do, but Adobe as a company is absolute trash right now, dude. They are. If you guys are at all interested, Google Adobe in the news.
Surprise me.
But no, so they have this thing called Creative Cloud, right? And what Creative Cloud is basically the install launcher for Adobe. So you know how like every game has a game launcher that it wants you to download that needs to launch first for you to play the game.
Yeah.
That's Creative Cloud, because everything's in the cloud. They want you to have this app launcher that connects you to the Adobe Cloud, so then you can have all these. So every time I try to get Premiere Pro, it wants me to go through this cloud. Well, the cloud isn't connecting to the server. And here's the other thing. You can get it off the website directly, right? I click the link. It goes directly to an error page. I Google that error thinking I would get like Adobe site's down right now. Kind of, there's all those websites that gives you those checkers. No, I Google that very link or that very error. Been happening. The earliest known post about that same exact error was like in 2012. Like over 10 years. And again, it's like every year there's complaints on forums, on Reddit, on Adobe, and there's always a different reason. There's always it's like literally anytime Adobe does anything, anytime Adobe sneezes, anytime they turn a light switch, these links break. So what's funny is Adobe doesn't even have a workaround, like directly. But if you go to the forums, everybody knows the workaround. Any forum will immediately tell you, here's what you have to do. And it's like a 5-step process. To go to a different link to a different part of Adobe's website, down to a bottom page to a link to a part of their website you can't get to directly without that link. And at the bottom of that page is a direct link install. So you got to do all that. So I try all of that. It doesn't work.
Of course not.
So I'm going through every forum. I've literally checked every box I possibly could. Like I've done absolutely everything I could find that everything from back to, again, I was looking at instructions from 2013. Like those instructions should be so outdated, I shouldn't even consider them. And I was still following them, right? I get to the point to where yesterday I have to hop on the phone. Was it yesterday or the day before? No, it was the day before, because yesterday we went out. So the next day, so Wednesday, I hop on the phone. Not hop on the phone, but I get on the chat, and I finally get an Adobe tech. Like I actually get a tech from Adobe, and I'm just like, what is going on here? I give them all the errors. I give them the laundry list of things I've already done, and they're like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. And for the next hour and a half, we are literally going through every back end step possible. Like, I've gotten to the point where I wiped every last bit of anything Adobe off my computer. Had to remove the
person on the phone didn't even know how to fix. They were just experimenting with your computer.
They were doing everything we possibly could. We wiped it all clean. We basically manipulated the firewall. We got rid of the VPN temporarily. Like we did everything possible, and they were just like, yeah, the errors with the server. And I'm like, I know the errors with the server. So basically what would be happening is the Creative Cloud would launch up and it says, hey, we can't contact the server. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, every now and again, when I would attempt this, Windows security alert or Windows security warning would pop up. It's that one that says like, hey, a script's trying to run. Normally scripts are safe, but do you want to run this one instead? It's like a comment, like I've seen this script before. So it's like, but it won't respond. Whether you play yes or no, it'll just keep popping up. So there's something going on this back end to where so again, the tech hour and a half, and eventually I'm like, bro, I gotta go eat dinner. Like I'm just at the point where I'm like, bro, I gotta like disconnect because it's late. And he's like, yeah, sorry. His only advice to me was, he had two pieces of advice. He's like, I could either add a new user to my computer, like a whole fresh user. And he's like, oh yeah, that should work just fine. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. We've literally wiped clean anything that should be stopping me. So I don't, and he's like, or you call Windows and you figure out why the script's not working. And I'm like, so you're going to blame Windows for your, I don't have this problem with anything on my computer.
Yeah.
That window, that warning never pops up until, so even to the point to where he gives me a direct download, like just for Premiere Pro, like an extract file just for that. And when we try to do it, because of the cloud, it kept stopping it. Like the cloud would stop that download. So I finally get off the phone with them. So today I'm playing around with it, but there was a point during all of that I realized that there was something that I think he did out of order at one point because we were trying to play with it. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I think he did this thing out of order. So I did try it again, where I think what happened was I tried to talk to him about, hey, can we just get like the Premiere Pro downloaded without cloud? But I think when he tried to do that, cloud was still on the system. So he had only shut it down, but cloud, I think, reinitialized.
Okay.
So what I ended up doing was I did re-scrape it of all Adobe products. I got rid of the cloud and I tried to use the extract file that he gave me. That's supposed to be just Premiere Pro, mm-hmm. no web link. And even though cloud kept trying to rear its ugly head, I was able to keep it suppressed long enough to get Premiere Pro to finally download today.
God bless.
So I finally have Premiere Pro. And
freaking Charlie,
I have made the very first short. I played around with it enough to where I finished as best as I could in my head represent what I wanted.
Right.
It's not as good looking because what I wanted would have been fine. I could have done what I wanted. The problem what I wanted it to look like isn't the clips that I had. Like I had an image of what it should have looked like, but the actual footage that I had wasn't what I remembered. So It didn't quite perfectly work, but I think it's going to be funny anyway. So I do have the very first short that will go up probably by the end of this month. I want to get a couple more because I don't want to just, post one and then have it die because that can be killed. That can really kill your algorithm. So I do want to have a couple more, but it didn't really take me that long. It took me 2 hours. Maybe an hour.
Okay.
Hour and a half. Something like that. It took me a minute to really get the hang of it. I don't have a flow, but making shorts isn't going to be that terrible as long as I have a clear idea of what I want to do. The only thing I need to do now is reformat it for shorts because right now it's still widescreen for long form, and I have to figure out how to get captions on there. I couldn't figure that out before we wanted to get started. So
interesting.
So yeah, exciting news. I finally have Adobe Premiere Pro. We are finally working on content, and hopefully I can get a couple things pumped out in the next 2 weeks to meet the goal by the end of the month to start posting the first shorts. Because I think that's all we're going to do right now is just post shorts. We're going to start posting them on the main YouTube channel, which is not the one that we link to normally. That's just the VOD channel. But we do have a main YouTube channel. We'll be posting the shorts there, and we'll also be starting TikTok at the same time. So I'm hoping that will also lead to a little bit more growth and a little bit more discovery for the stream.
Dope. No, I'm stoked for that.
What's going on, Freeman? Nice to see you. Oh my God, Cosmic, what is going on here? Oh, this is Tuesday's episode, or this is his Tuesday game. So God tier character. Wait, so. Oh, your God tier item. I remember you telling me about the staff of the Python for this character.
I don't remember.
This was a long time ago. Yeah,
oh.
I remember when you posted about the staff of the Python. I think this is for his. I want to say he has the staff of the Python for his Aarakocra for the Sea Battle campaign. Okay. The one that can dive underwater and everything. Because I remember talking about the idea of like using the snake to be like a water serpent and everything.
I do remember you saying something like that.
So yeah,
that sounds familiar.
I'm pretty sure that's what I remember last time we talked about the staff of the Python.
Okay.
So it ended up fighting a shark. Oh yeah, so yeah, if it's fighting a shark, then I think of that I'm right.
Right.
He had a staff of the Python. So it was fighting a shark, and it was in my silence spell effect. Okay, so the shark thing that you had it fighting was in your silence spell. Okay. It was a religious creature and the cultist chanting to control it. Okay. The silence spell was meant to cut off the hearing of the enchanted, so it berserker and it didn't go well. Okay, I like that, right? So you have cultists who are controlling this shark, So cast silence to cut off the cultist's control. But at the same time, the shark is actively fighting his serpent from the staff. So his idea was it will go berserk and maybe hopefully turn against the cultist or whatever. But I couldn't cast it on the cultists as they were too spread out, so he couldn't get them all in the 20-foot sphere.
Okay.
So that made his character... So that was making his character. The DM rolled a D1 3 times as a starter loot. The result got me the Staff to Python. Yeah, I remember that's how he got it. So the fun part is the name of the snake, Asmodeus, who is the same name as the god I worship to gain trickery cleric abilities. Plan to factor that in when and if you level up. Okay. So so what happened? Did the shark just annihilate it because did it just go berserk because the silence was broken, or because you used silence did it go berserk and just tear apart your snake? Is that what happened? What's going on? So Freeman, who were you talking about, Cosmic or us?
It kind of sounded like you was talking to Cosmic.
I thought, because I hadn't read what Cosmic posted, so I just see a bunch of Cosmic stuff, and then I just see Freeman's comment about, you really go in depth. Do you want to create your own thing? And I'm like, well, Cosmic does have his own setting too.
That is true.
Oh, talking to us. So yes, actually. So I don't know if would ever consider making my own TTRPG. Like, I've made some interesting spin-offs, but every time I try to make something, I always end up incorporating it into High Point. I mean, I do consider High Point to, I guess in D&D terms, like old school terms, it would be its own module.
Yeah.
But nowadays, I guess it would just be considered its own expansion or its own supplemental.
And you've got some custom rules, associated with it. But
so absolutely. I mean, I've never... I will say this. In the 10 years I've been building High Point, I've never seriously sat down and thought, I'm going to publicize this and make this marketable. However, the longer I work on it and the more things that I've done, and not just the small little tweaks of I like this, I like that, but the more I've really honed a lot of the effects that we've talked about on stream, the more I think it actually has a place in the wider community. But how I would get that out, I have no idea. Like, okay. If this catches on, like, imagine if D&D discussions and Misfit Gamer Studios, like, if all of this catches on with YouTube and with you guys on the live stream, and we get to a point to where, I forget who it was, but it was the same streamers, or it was like streamers and YouTubers that made the Theria setting.
Oh,
like, it's like, so there are people, are I mean, like Roll20, or not Roll20, but Critical Role. Like there are plenty of very famous entertainment people in the D&D area that have gotten to that point to where they've been able to publicize their stuff, right, as an actual content. May not be Wizards of the Coast level content, but it's publicized to the point that people used it. Would I do that with High Point? I think so. I think that would be really cool if there was enough interest, and if I got to a point to where I felt I could get the rule sets locked in like that. If I could actually figure out a way to translate how High Point works, that would be really interesting. But has that been the goal? Not really. Like, it's always just been, I just like my own world, and I got to that point to where it's like D&D keeps evolving, but it's easier to keep up with my own story, right? Yeah. So instead of keeping up with the books, like right now, look at what's happening to 5th edition right now with D&D 2024.
Yeah.
Or it's D&D 1 or 1 D&D or D&D 20. I think it was supposed to be called 1 D&D first, and then people started calling it D20, and now it's D&D 2024 because no one knows what to call it. Because basically what it is it's basically a revamp of 5th edition. So it's not quite such an overhaul where it's a brand new expansion, but they were kind of phrasing it as the next edition, but they weren't calling it 6th.
They should call it D&D 5.5. We have 3.5.
Like 3.5, exactly. Like,
same thing.
That's basically, so yeah, people are basically all, because everybody on YouTube and Twitch right now, basically everyone's talking about it. Like, obviously I'm interested, but I barely know the previous 5th edition. Like, I will get into it, I will learn it, and I will adopt what I want, but at the end of the day, like, look at what's happening. Look at what's happening to the content. Everybody needs to talk about it, right? Everyone's talking about the new changes. It's flooded. We couldn't, if we started making that content, it's already old news, right? But on top of that, imagine what's happening to all the people who have spent the last 3 to 5 years, 8
Making
years
content
gaming
that
with
flows well with,
and now all of a sudden D&D is saying, hey, here's some new stuff, and everyone loves the new stuff, which is great. But now DMs have to are going to be pressured to get this new content, to use this new content, to adapt it, to memorize all of the it's going to take a while for this new content unless you're starting out with new gaming groups. It's not like it's going to be a smooth transition, right? Which
very
again
much so.
is a long time ago was part of the reason why I'm like, you know what, I'm comfortable gaming in second because I have enough features that I take from all of the editions that it doesn't feel like second.
And I totally feel that. To be honest, I try to make everything available to my players, and so you can come in and play whatever you want. And honestly, when one of my players says I want to use that, then I'll learn it. But until that happens, it's almost irrelevant to me. Although there are elements that I want to look at because I definitely think that there are improvements to be made to all things 5th edition. I just personally haven't gotten around to making all the adjustments that I think should be there. And so if they find better ways to do it before I get to it, sure, I'll totally be down to incorporate it. But it is what it is. I'm not in a hurry. It's not going anywhere. It's not like they're gonna delete it from the internet. If I take too long to go look at it.
Exactly, and that's the thing. So it's I know that there's a lot of really interesting changes, a lot of cool changes, but one of the things that I suffer with, that I think in general, is because I've been developing High Point for so long, I've made so many small modifications, and I don't even mean modifications as in the rules don't apply, right? Most rules as written apply. I just also look at exceptions to the rules and situations, right? As a standard default, I will look at rules as written and go, okay, as a default, every standard NPC will follow these rules, just like every player on average will follow these rules on a when you're not gaming, right? In between. But in those moments when we're gaming and there's a better, more narrative based option, and again, everyone always says it's the rule of cool, but it's not always about the rule of cool, right? It's sometimes about what's logical. Rule of cool is sometimes when you want to break a rule, but sometimes bending a rule just makes more narrative sense, right? And I've done that so much that I feel like, I could probably pinpoint and make a good rule set, but I don't know. At the same time, it feels weird because a lot of it's just dynamic, right? A lot of my rule sets have really been situational and not this is going to apply to everyone from here on out.
Right.
That's the hardest part for doing transitioning High Point into something that's tangible. Is a lot of it would be if this is the player handbook, this would be the DM manual. The Dungeon Master Guide.
Yeah.
Simply because here's how to play High Point in High Point, here's how to run High Point, and every page would basically be so here's a cool concept. Here's an example of how I've used it. Now here's 2.5 pages of random things that you need to understand about
why I've done what I've done and
or it would just be here's 50 different ways you could approach this, and this isn't even an exhaustive list. Most of it would just be there's no definitive way of doing this. A lot of it would just end with DM discretion. 90% of my rules are DM discretion, right?
That's fair.
So yeah, no, I would love to see High Point usable and written out, but how to translate it, right? Because I'm not worried about the story of High Point. I don't know if I would ever make modules based off of the campaigns I've done, but I would write different things that I know that exist in High Point and let people run with them. So I don't think I would be worried too much about handing over the IP in terms of I wouldn't worry about people using my naming structure and what's going on, especially if I've marketed it and profited off it. I'd be fine with that.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's I really wouldn't worry because the core lore would never really change, and I'd probably publish basically things that aren't current. You know what I mean? I'd probably publish lore books, but or books on characters and NPCs that have lore in them, but I really wouldn't worry about putting out active modules of things that I'm creating. That would definitely I think just be left up to here's a book about a world and a lot of the rules that I've changed, but I really wouldn't worry too much about making it a module to play. I think it'd be more of a DM guide to how to do it. That would actually, you know what? That would be really interesting. How how interesting would it be to create, because you know how we have like supplemental guides, right? Like Tasha's Cauldron and all of that. Imagine a new type of supplemental where it's a DM, like not DM guide to homebrewing, but like DM guide to modification or DM guide to alteration. And basically it's a Dungeon Master's guide completely written from like our point of view of how to approach rules as written. Like how to take a foundation and how to approach it so where you can feel comfortable changing it without breaking the rules or breaking the game. Like,
interesting.
You know, like talk about like how standardized hit points work, and then talk about how you can work with what hit points actually mean, right? Like instead of just saying, here's how hit points work mechanically, you go down to 0, you take death saves. You have so many, you get so many during level ups. Right. But we can discuss the things like you may want to take this optional rule of at 50%, you know, like it used to be called bloodied, you know, you have detriments. At 10%, you start to feel woozy. At 5%, you pass out. Like that's one optional rule set. Or you could look at hit points as more than just life. You could look at it as fatigue. You could look at it as their ability to make rolls. Like you might want to just say, hey, dexterity, as you get less life, dexterity rolls, intelligence rolls, you know, wisdom saving throws, all of those are going to decrease by 2. Like you're going to have a -2 because you're literally struggling just to stay standing, right?
Interesting.
So a DM guide to approaching rules is written to be more comfortable making calls and just how to make calls that are appropriate. Bad. That would be a really cool supplemental for a DM.
Yeah. And because I think too few DMs will like actually sit down and look at that concept and like, how do I want to approach this? How do I want to?
I think most just want to know how does it work so they can implement it and make their players happy. But you know, I would like I think one to help DMs that want to be more creative with their own settings, and maybe that's it. Maybe that it would be a DM guide for DMs creating their own setting, or at least, you know, being highly manipulative of like a module.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I do feel that.
That would be kind of cool. Oh, let's see. Yeah. Other updates. By the way, you guys may have noticed, we're having a small celebration, nothing major, you know, but
it's a good time. It's a good time.
We're celebrating a lot of things. Celebrating the new followers, close to affiliate. We're doing a lot on the roadmap. I have some things going on that I also can't talk about until next week that I'm also celebrating, but I can publicly talk about it next week, so that'll be fine. But yeah, future ideas I think are going to be, there's so many things I want to do, guys. Like I am so excited. Like I was talking with Kage before stream about just like one of the, like, you know, I've already talked to you guys about like doing IRL streams. So like going out and actually doing, or like not IRL streams, but like IRL content. So going like doing YouTube content that's slightly more scripted, like how to visualize combat better, or how to translate combat, you know, D&D combat to real life, and talking about what parts of D&D combat make sense and why it doesn't. And, you know, like, you know, so I really want to do that because I have a bunch of buddies that could, you know, go up in armor and actually show us like what real fights look like. You know, those kind of ideas. We came up with another one where, you know, potentially going to some of our, like we've talked about, you know, doing sub interviews via the Discord for, you know, you guys that are, you know, that are followers that want to talk to us, but also potentially going to local gaming shops, you know, talking to the people there, seeing if they want to do like some quick, you know, like rapid fire interviews. I wouldn't do like anything big, like not documentary level. But I have this idea for like these rapid fire interviews where it's either the people who work at the shops or go there on game nights, have set up like a little table, you know, with like a sign that lets people know that we're doing this for YouTube, and like have DMs come over and be like, hey, you got 3 minutes to answer 10 questions. Like you down for this?
Right.
Or, you know, you got 10 minutes. And basically, instead of doing like what we do here, is we would kind of flip the script. We would ask them questions we've already discussed, like a topic that we've already discussed. We already know what our rule sets are. Having a DM come in and be like, hey, so give us a quick breakdown of who you are, what's your background, and here we go. And then just like set the timer and be like, what's your thought on this? How would you do this? This is the scenario. How would you, you know, what would you like having like, hey, player has done this. This is the role, and this is what the player is asking. What's your call? Like,
Right.
Doing that where we have a couple different questions where, before the episode we'll answer them, and then we'll just be able to sit there and interview a couple people and see what they think. And that sounds like a really cool idea that I want to get to. Hang on one sec. My computer is screaming at me.
No problem. But no, I definitely agree. I think that'll be a pretty cool event when we finally get down to doing stuff like that. And there's a couple of good spots that I feel like we could go for that. So that wouldn't be pretty bad.
Yeah, it's the hardest part is keeping that the anonymity.
That's very fair. That's very fair. But we can make it work.
Okay, that was you. I was like wondering what's going on in the Discord.
Acting crazy.
But other updates, guys. So we have made some recent decisions. The polls are finally closed. Thank you guys so much for anybody who did vote in the polls in the Discord. We finally got everybody's consensus in, and we basically got what we wanted. Really, it was more or less a pulse check to make sure that we in the community were on the same page, that we were all kind of in the same mind space. So we've made a couple of decisions on how we're going to move forward with the naming schemes. So moving forward, we are keeping, obviously we're still going to be Misfit Gamer Studios. That's not changing. Our names aren't changing. But in terms of content, so we are keeping D&D discussions as the title of the live stream, right? So as far as we're concerned, when we're here in the studio, when we're doing our Monday and Fridays and maybe, future episodes, but when we're doing this format, it's D&D discussions as far as we're concerned. Excuse me. We've had a lot of conversations about this on the back end, whether or not this is a very marketable brand, whether or not it's an even available brand. I have noticed that D&D discussions has been used, not as a brand, not like as a channel name or anything else like that, but there have been other creators who have used it in passing, or at least as a category, and which is kind of what we use it as. I don't think we're really looking to brand D&D discussions as anything more than what the live stream is. So yeah, so you guys can basically look forward to more D&D discussions. However, moving into the YouTube space, D&D discussions will be basically reserved as a playlist for typically what you guys will see on the Friday episodes, which are our topic-based episodes. Previously, we were throwing around different names. We were, for a while, calling it Deeper Discussions. And really, we were just realizing that branding-wise, marketing-wise, it's messy to have so many different names and have so many different things going on, when realistically they were all just the same thing. It was just a different way for us to categorize it. So instead of worrying about having Monday and Friday be labeled differently, the live stream is D&D discussions. Monday's D&D discussions, Friday's D&D discussions. Mondays we do reviews. Fridays we do topics. That's as far as that's it. It's no more homebrew review. It's no more deeper discussions. It's D&D discussions, and you're either getting a review or you're getting a topic, right? Like, we feel like that's going to be a lot cleaner. Now, on YouTube, what you guys are going to start to see on the VOD channel, we are going to start changing up the playlist. So on the YouTube, on the Misfit Gamer Studios live channel, we are going to start splitting out the live streams. So we'll have, a playlist for all of just the D&D live streams, because I also have my gaming live streams on there. And then we'll have playlists for the reviews, and then we'll have a playlist for just the topics. So it'll be, all, and then the split between the two. That way, at least on YouTube, you guys can, if you guys just want a playlist of just the things that we've talked about, that's just going to be by itself. If you just want to hear all the things that we reviewed, that will be its own playlist. Now, while we're going to be dropping the naming schemes from the stream, so the titles of the episodes, just like today, you're not going to see D&D discussions anymore. You're not going to see, homebrew review anymore. It's just going to be whatever it is we're talking about. It's either going to be what we're reviewing, it's going to be the name of the item, or it's going to be the name of the topic. So moving forward, you guys can look forward to not having to worry about that kind of branding. D&D discussions in name only, essentially, and on the for the playlist for YouTube. So Mondays, what are those going to look like then on the YouTube channel? Because it's not going to have a different title on Twitch. But when you log into YouTube, both for the live channel and then when we get the main channel up and running with edits and, shortened down. We are now going to be categorizing all of the reviews. We're going to get rid of Homebrew Review because it is probably the most basic name that you could have for it, and everybody uses it.
That is very fair. That is very fair.
It is literally just what people do, is a homebrew review, and it's not something that we can brand. And I just want to get away with it, right? I don't want to just be generic with it. And if we do want to get into the YouTube space, you type in homebrew review and every channel has homebrew review. I want something that stands out. I want something that's a little bit more hashtaggy, if you make sense, fair. More SEO like. Yes. So, moving forward, while everything is going to be still D&D discussions, we will now be retitling Homebrew Review to, drumroll, I don't have one. We'll add that in post. Community Creations.
Yes.
So on YouTube, once I get YouTube updated over the weekend, all of the homebrew reviews, all of the review channels, whether they were standard reviews, whether they were showcases, all of those are going to now be essentially under the playlist of Community Creations. And that's essentially what all of our reviews are going to be called. So we're going to start moving to that naming structure. We'll still have the submissions channel. I don't think that's going to change. I still think that's a great name for that. But yeah, we're going to start moving to anything that involves what you all have submitted. Community Creations is where we're gonna label that, and we're not gonna bother trying to separate another naming convention between standard D&D content and specific setting specific stuff, where we were trying to play around with like showcasing and stuff. So all of it's just going to be Community Creations. It's just going to be whether or not it gets a high point or a star rating, a showcase star rating. Yeah. And we are still going to do that separation. So essentially, if we get a submission that is D&D generic, like a subclass that anybody can use, a weapon that anybody can use, a spell that's designed for anybody, basically, if it's just for the wider D&D community, that will still remain. It'll be a community creation. It'll get its everyday normal review like we always do, and it'll get its X out of 10 high points. And again, those high points being compatibility with my realm, not necessarily how good it is. But it will factor in what I think of in terms of its balancing and all of that stuff. We still will also have special episodes where we do showcases. And this one, again, kind of like in D&D discussions, it'll be in name only. So on a Monday, if it's a showcase, we'll say, hey, welcome to D&D discussions. Today we have a community creation, or today we have a submission from so-and-so, but we will just at that time identify that it will be a showcase versus a review. And again, just like before, we're not trying to specifically name them. It's either going to be a standard review or a showcase. The only difference being a review is going to be us approaching it from both a DM and a player standpoint, as well as a balancing standpoint.
Yes.
For showcases, they will get a star rating out of 5 instead of a high point rating out of 10. And that's just because with showcases, because they are setting specific or they are non-D&D related, those really don't have a way for us to balance it or approach it as a DM. So we basically approach it from the point of view as a player, and talk about whether or not, it's interesting, what appeals to us, what questions we would have, what draws us to it, where we would take it, and how we feel about it. As in, sometimes that does include balancing, but not so much from a D&D point of view, but from a how am I experiencing this kind of level.
Very much so, yes.
So that's what a showcase is, and we will continue to still do showcases when appropriate. And if we start to get a lot of those, we may shift that into YouTube exclusive content, because we also want to do things like trying out other TTRPGs. I would love to do a run through of Call of Cthulhu. There was that space one that we were told about recently that we have to look up. The stellar, or no stars left, or no stars in the sky.
I feel like we wrote that down somewhere.
Yeah, it's in the admin chat. But yeah, so it's we want to do a lot of that stuff, but some of that would be better left off on YouTube, and some of that is good for the stream. So yeah, so you guys can start to look forward to that. So again, community creations, you'll most likely only really be seeing that on YouTube, or we'll say it, but that's the new naming structure for where you guys submit us homebrew for us to review. We still will have regular reviews for high points and showcases for stars. D&D discussions, of course, will just be the title of the live stream. So that's just going to happen for both Friday and Monday. And even in terms of YouTube, we also might be splitting out, like if we continue to do history of episodes like today, we'll also be probably adding that as its own playlist as well on YouTube. So eventually you can have just a history of playlist. But yeah, that's where we're going with the titles right now. I think that's actually going to be really good for us. I think the titles are going to be a welcome change. I think it was getting a little bit too it was just getting too messy, and it was great for categorization, but like branding, marketing, and just like title wise, we didn't need all of that. We didn't need D&D discussions in every title. We didn't need to worry about what Monday should be called versus Friday. Like, y'all are here. Y'all know what the deal is. If you're new, you're going to find out really quick what we're talking about that day. And if you're not new, you know how it works, right? Like, right. And then if you come in and, if you're on YouTube, none of this is going to matter because it's just going to be episodes that you get to click through, right? And at that point,
you'll have playlists and you can choose what you want to look at, and you'll know what it is before you get to it. So
exactly, and that's basically where we're at with all of that. Yeah. So look forward to some changes on the YouTube side if you guys do frequent our VOD channel. And again, I'm starting to work on shorts. So eventually, hopefully by the end of this month, the main channel will be up and running with some shorts.
Very cool.
Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff is happening.
It's going to be very cool. I'm super here for it.
I am super excited. Let's see here. Oh, okay. My bad. I thought something was going on in the Discord, and I realized that you're just asking questions about a submission.
Oh, yes.
I was just like, where is this happening? I was like, okay. So yeah, let us know. I'm really curious what you guys think about all of those changes. I hope you guys are excited as we are. There's going to be a lot of things happening soon. Things are going to happen fast. I have a feeling, especially because like I don't expect to blow up or go viral. But knowing how the different streams work, I would not be surprised if we get a sudden bump in at least followership. Maybe not in viewership, but both on the YouTube and the Twitch side, I would not be surprised that within a couple months we see a decent bump in followership because of the shorts.
Oh, yes. I would agree with that. I'm very much looking forward to what that looks like.
As am I. Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to do. I totally forgot to get music up and running,
Oh, that's right.
Because we can do that.
I'm very excited for how that looks. I'm going to be rewatching Monday's stream coming up here this weekend.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Monday's stream was fine. Pretty sure it was. Okay, that's way too loud. Okay. There we go. Let me know in the chat. Let me know if that is too loud or if you can even hear it, because I want to know if you guys are just chilling to that. It's kind of nice to have some background. I totally forgot to start it up. So
that's all right. You can add it to your stream deck here. And
actually, I should add those numbers. I can actually add that to my startup protocol.
Yeah, exactly.
To just launch it and play it. So, yeah, absolutely. All right. So what do I got to do here? I got some notes for some stream topics. Apparently, I guess we got something to talk about today.
Sweet.
I mean, we're not just talking about updates and how awesome our audience is. All right, what do we got? We got an hour in. Wow, updates took an hour, y'all. How fun is that? That's not what I need to look for. I need to look for... There we go. So we have an interesting topic for today. So I'm really interested because I know we've had various random conversations about this. But officially, what do you know, officially or unofficially, lore-wise, about the metatext?
Like with most things, practically jack squat. The only thing I know about metatext is what comes to mind when I hear the word and what it immediately makes me feel like you can do. There was this movie I watched like forever ago called Ruby Sparks, where
that sounds really familiar.
It's a really weird, like, I feel like it's like an indie movie, but it's basically the story of this girl who wrote a story and it became reality, and like anything that she would write about this person in the book would become true.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. I've seen a couple renditions of that in the movies before.
And so it's just like that concept of like, that's metatext. Like, you're messing with reality with the text that's literally sitting in front of you, you know? So that's my initial concept of just like what it means to be metatext, something that can mess with reality that it's not supposed to.
All right, perfect. You were not far off, though. It's not hard to be not far off when there is no absolute definitive definition.
Fair, very fair.
But in all of the representations and what we know of the metatext, at least what is official lore, you're not far off in expectation. Okay. So we're already in the ballpark for that. I'm gonna step out real quick, but you were definitely you're on the right path with the idea that it's a other level of knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what the actual lore ends up being on this front, because it's I'm curious, like, if and what, like, again, he said it was short, so there's only probably a couple mentions of it here and there, but like being able to do things, write something into existence or write something out of existence or whatever the case may be, like, I'm curious to see how actual D&D history has used this in the past, because I feel like you can do some stupid stuff with that. I'm very interested. But when it comes to like items and stuff and like how this would be like actually used, like I don't know if I would just like have a book that has the metatext of existence in it, and like you just look through it and it's like the book with infinite pages. Like, imagine I swear that's in some sort of comic book lore or something like that, and just imagine, but that book with infinite pages has the metatext of like all existence in it, and you can just go in. Now obviously but not just anybody can go in and like write whatever they feel like in it, but just being able to see that, read that, like it would basically be like the book of all things. Like, you would be able to know any and everything, and it would be all there. Like, Vortex, have you heard of this website called the Library of Babel or something like that?
Yeah.
Where it supposedly has like every combinations of words and like all of existence like categorized in this.
Yeah, I've known of that website. Yeah.
That's kind of.
It's
what this. I mean, not exactly, but it's.
Yeah. You're very close. So there's another similar concept. We'll go on this concept before we get on the real one. So yeah. So the one other thing I have the issue with that website is like, it's just an algorithmic code. It's not actually a database of everything. It's just that based off of how it encodes and decodes information.
Yeah.
It's just that if you type something in based off of that, it will. Essentially, I don't want to say arbitrarily, but essentially it'll arbitrarily be like, oh, that's in this page on this side. But it's like, if you think about that, no matter what you type, because it's a search function. So it claims, I have everything in existence in this book. And it's like, I will tell you what page it's on. It's like, so I tell you something and you're just going to give me an arbitrary page that it's on. Now, granted, if you type the same thing and we can get 1,000 people to type the same thing in different instances and they all go to the same page, that could seem really clever. Like, oh my, see, it's on that page. That page was always there. And it's like, no, that page that number,
just an algorithm.
That page number is just a mathematical equation based on the words you typed. If you took 1,000 people and all typed the same paragraph, but changed one word, like the last word, you wouldn't go to the same page.
Yeah.
Because it needs the entire sentence. So yes, that entire sentence, that entire paragraph does exist. But if you just delete the period at the end of that sentence, it'll take you to a different page. It shouldn't, because it's the same fucking sentence, but because you took away the period, now you're telling me there's a different page. So you're telling me now that if I wrote a paragraph with 100 characters and I took one away and you went to a different page, you're telling me that there are 99 other pages with the same sentence but minus one character? Like, you start to realize this is not real. It's just a mathematical algorithm, just like hexadecimal code.
Yes.
So anyway, that was a dumb tangent, but I do remember seeing that. It was a unique idea and a proof of concept, but it was also just like but that's like any computer program. Like, you can make it look like it does whatever it wants as long as you can make it look consistent, but that's not real consistency. But no, there is another similar real-life theoretical concept that is based off what you were just talking about, though. Similar to that website. That website's kind of like a proof of concept for the theoretical idea of like compartmentalized data. But the real theory is that by technicality, right? If you could break down everything into like ones and zeros, right? Or any kind of like mathematical equation, right? You can basically break down everything into numbers.
Sure.
And if you could do that, essentially, if you could break down the entire universe into numbers, the code to the universe, the code to anything, any mathematical formula, everything in existence, if you believe you can break it into numbers, exists in pi. Not only is pi important for all the reasons, but pi is infinite. The decimal place of pi is infinite. So within pi, every algorithm that exists. Every program to ever exist, ever has, ever will, exist within pi, because pi is infinite, means, mathematically speaking, there is every combination of number within pi. If it's infinite, every number combination will exist, meaning that with that infinite string, every computer program, every algorithm, every mathematical calculation to ever exist or ever will in the future currently exists in pi, theoretically. Now, does that help anybody?
I mean, yes.
Absolutely fucking not.
You got to know how to find it. You got to know how to all the things.
But the point being is, theoretically, it's true. Because of that, because of its importance, pi, it's another way of like philosophically thinking of pi as more important, because technically it already has a lot of importance, but then you can literally say it literally encompasses everything, right? And then because it's not the only infinite number, but it is one of the most important infinite numbers.
Right. Yes.
So it is curious. So bringing that back to the idea of the topic, right? The idea of the metatext being some sort of continued piece of knowledge, bit of code, line of text, whatever it is, literally being everything, to where at any point you can snip it out and be like, that's this. And if I modified it, I could change reality. So there is a real life, theoretical concept of that idea that if you took pi literally, pi is the metatext, because then if you could somehow manipulate it, not necessarily the number, but if you would manipulate the idea of what it says, you could change how everything works.
Interesting.
So going into all of that, you were not far off originally from essentially what the metatext is. Now, to really understand the metatext, we have to get into the mindset that not everything D&D came out with was either finished, polished, or ever really fully fleshed out. Like, there are things in D&D that were either left undone or intentionally undone, right? And we've talked about this both on and off stream quite a bit. I bring this up a lot, where my justification for a lot of the ways that I've changed the lore to fit High Point and not ever change true lore. Like, all D&D lore has not changed according to High Point. I just abuse some of the loopholes or some of the the areas that they don't fill in, right? I just abuse that and fill in my own details. But I've mentioned this multiple times, where it is my firm belief that the original creators, Gygax and his buddies, intentionally left vague or unfinished details on purpose.
I would agree.
And not to do the Star Wars thing later where they fill it in when they have more ideas, but they intentionally left it vague and undefined in order to make the world expansive. And the number one thing I talk about is why I still use crystal spheres, why I like the crystal sphere from Forgotten Realms and from the original mindset, is because this idea that you have this vastness, right, of the phlogiston, this vastness of nothingness, and you have these random crystal spheres in places, right? Based off of that lore, I talked about this in my early episode, and it's one of my earlier episodes called The Histories of High Point, with like a 5-episode series on that. And in those episodes, I talked about like the crystal sphere of High Point, how I got, how Zenith got to it, and all of that. But one of the things I also talked about is the reason why I like crystal spheres is because the way that they discussed them, the way that they explained how crystal spheres operate, where they are in time and space, how the phlogiston works, and how they were discovered, they kept leaving unfinished things, right? They would leave things as like the discoverers, theorized that they would go on forever. So there was no definitive they go on forever or they stop. They never decided there's only 12 crystal spheres, right? They never decided that they're infinite. They just, we don't know. But the whole point is, well, if you know of these crystal spheres, right? Like here's D&D, here are these modules. You can go to these locations and inside that crystal sphere, boom, there's this module. But wait, you're telling me that there's this other crystal sphere with this module? Yes. And you're telling me in this other lore that's just kind of hanging around that no one knows if the crystal spheres stop. That is correct. So is there going to be lore about that? And then they just kind of shrug it off. And it's like, to me, that's intentional. Not because they want to fill it in later, but because that's where people like me are supposed to come in. Someone who wants to say, hey, I want my own setting, but I want to use these rules and these foundations, but I don't want to be in that planet. I don't want to be in that world. I don't want to be under those gods. So
it goes back to what Freeman asked earlier. It's like, you're going to create your own, like, this is your crystal sphere. This is your module, so to speak.
This is my own setting, my own TTRPG as far as I'm concerned, because it's based on, D&D. But I don't follow any of the I follow D&D ancient lore, but none of the things that you deal with are active D&D stuff, right?
Right.
So so it's really interesting to brain. What were you trying to say there?
Bringing it back.
But yeah, so talking about, it's interesting to think about why they left certain things vague. Why did they specifically? Because it's not like they just didn't discuss certain things. They intentionally brought things up and then just like left it as, oh, well, the journal ends here. The pages are ripped out. Like, it's literally just left of, we'll never know. And I think that's very important. I've talked about this before too, where I think that's also important sometimes for story, is even for people like us who are all about there's an answer for everything. Mm-hmm. There's also room for the unknown. Even though there might be an answer to everything, that answer might be no one knows, right? Like, the answer might lie in a journal, and that journal may be burned. And then that's where the story dies. And it's like, but there's an answer. It's like, yes, the answer was in the journal. Well, what's the answer? Well, it's lost. The journal's burned, it's lost. So what's the answer? It was in the journal. Like, that can be the end of it. Like, that can be okay. Like, we talk so much about there needs to be a reason, but that is a legitimate end to something of the information is lost. There is no one alive that knows it. You can't possibly discover who knows it, who's dead, and the only physical proof is gone. Game over. Like, those are sometimes the okay dead ends to run into if that is truthfully the answer.
And if you as a DM want an answer for it, have a time travel mission where they go back in time and they see what happened, and then you create the lore that it coexists with the world that you have created, or the world that you've been playing in, if that's what you really want to do, because it gives you that ability.
And that's the thing. It's like, so there's so many things out there that we've talked about where they created something, they hinted at something, and then they just...
I'm going to be right back.
Yeah, they just left it to be... They just left it to the DMs, right? They left it to the storytellers, which is what the DMs were meant to be. They left it to the storytellers to figure out what to do with it and to fill in the gaps. Again, I really do think that's where people like me were meant to be inspired by that. We were meant to take what they didn't finish and take the areas that didn't have detail and fill in what we thought made sense in order to build off of those ideas. And again, because they showed us that crystal spheres can operate differently, anything you decided to do different of the rules made perfect sense as long as it operated within that crystal sphere, within your gaming session. So they you know, there's countless of ways that we've seen where they'll mention something and then not fulfill us with the actual details. And the meta text is exactly that. It's been spoke about. It has lore. It has prominent NPCs that are attached to it and that are part of that lore. But at the end of the day, we really don't know much about it. It's one of those topics that, from the D&D lore standpoint, it's one of those aspects that was only meant for the gods. There are some gods, there are some deities that knew about the metatext and have messed with it, and that's about all we know. We know who messed with it, we know some things that had happened to it historically, but otherwise, it's kind of like what I was talking about before. It's all ancient knowledge. It's all, well, this is what we know of, but that's it. There is no knowledge beyond that. That is the answer. The answer that they gave us, the official lore, is that this is all we know. So it's kind of like basically saying, if you want to play a game where you as the DM play these deities, then you have to make up what their answers are. But otherwise, that's it. These deities, these gods who have unfathomable mindsets and agendas are the only things that know what happened and understand it. But on a mortal level, right? Player, character-wise, that's where the story dies.
Maybe this is specific to High Point, but what would you say? Would you say the types of gods that would have interacted with something as significant as the metatext would be on the same level that you've described gods of concepts like death?
Oh, so like the Eternals. So surprisingly enough, it's actually, well, because we're going to get into it. From what we would consider, these are substantially lower level gods dealing with this kind of magic, or dealing with this level of power, which is unique. It's definitely lower level than we would consider.
When you say lower level, is this lower level than Zenith?
In how I compare it, technically. Like how I would compare it, yeah. But again, it's showing that how old, like this is the older version of D&D where deities were looked at differently. Deities weren't necessarily, because remember, original D&D was highly based off of lore and mythos of Greek mythology. It was Irish mythology. So, a lot of the stuff was made off of real life lore and real life mythos. So, the deities of the time, or the old original deities, weren't always omnipotent, all-powerful beings. They were saints, like a saint in old D&D. Like, essentially what we would call a saint could be considered a deity. Like how you have, like, Hercules is a deity, according to early D&D lore. Like, Hercules could be considered a deity.
Interesting.
Because even though he would still be considered a demigod and have all of, like, the same, like, halfness of it, in D&D terms, he still would have been on the level. So we'll get into that here now, because we're going to go into that. But gotcha. I wanted to bring that up because the metatext has a very brief and vague history, but it's also rich. Like, it has layers to it. But you're going to see here, these layers are more like bullet points. It's not like a diatribe and a story that you can, read your kids at night, or a poem that sounds beautiful and makes you think. It's literally more like I got like 5 bullet points of history notes, but within those 5 bullet points, it's like, okay, there's some shit going on with this.
Right.
But you intentionally were like, that's all we know.
Okay.
So, again, I like these kind of things because I really do believe that these were the creators of D&D giving us the seeds to plant ourselves. I believe that, again, it's the mindset that a D&D was originally created to not answer all the questions. And I think that that's part of the reason that we have some issues with 5th edition right now, is there's so much content, it's almost like they're trying to make sure every question has an answer. And I think the original D&D had it better when they were like, not everything needs a global answer. Sometimes a DM can make a decision. And I think, again, older mindset versus newer mindset. Newer mindset streamlined. It's meant to give players and DMs as much as possible so they can just get up and go. Older, it really was expecting you to do all of the legwork. So, bigger mindset there. But again, I think that's a good thing. I think it encourages people to be more creative instead of just expect what's the right answer.
Right.
So, with the metatext, we are going to go over the history of the metatext as we know it, as far as the lore states, and we are going to talk about some of the most famous NPCs to interact with the metatext.
Okay.
So, all the way back in early D&D, in the olden days.
Really old.
The metatext has always been something that has been much more of a side conversation. There's never really been, like, a chapter on the metatext. There's never been, like, the metatext, here's what it is.
In this conversation.
It's always in lore.
Interesting.
It's always in the background. Now, what is the metatext? Let's kind of define it, because it's going to be a little bit interesting, because the metatext doesn't have a solid lore. It does not have a solid definition, but we can kind of piece together the interpretations of what they were expecting. But in-game, most often you hear the metatext relating to knowledge, information, a lot of, like, divine scripture. Not all divine scripture is the metatext, but the metatext is usually referred to as divine scripture. Of holy knowledge, of greater, of or beyond knowledge of the beyond. It's always just referred to as just initially it was always in reference to unknown or not unknown, but like forbidden knowledge. It was always meant to be like this is knowledge beyond knowledge, right? And that's kind of how they always kept it in small references. But one most prominent NPC, most often associated, is Denier. Denier is the most common associated NPC from D&D lore that has ever interacted with it.
Denier. Okay.
So
this is a lesser god of sorts?
Yes, we're going to get into all of these people here real quick. But yeah, basically, you're going to hear Denier a lot. He's basically the main protagonist when it comes to the metatext. Basically, it all kind of revolves around him, and then it just kind of, plays out from there. So we will start with Denier. Down. Let's go. Window capture. So who is Denier? We don't even have a picture of Denier. That's how little we have on this character.
Okay.
There's not even a picture. No artwork has ever been produced that I could find of Denier. But who is Denier? So Denier was, at least at the height of who they were considered the god of writing, glyphs, literature, and knowledge in Forgotten Realms. Basically, that is what they were the god of. They elevated to the god of writing, glyphs, literature, and knowledge. And at this point, they were known as a neutral good lesser deity. So they were considered by title a lesser deity. But when I say we would consider them lesser deities, is because like most of these were like kind of like Hercules, mortals that did so well. Not Hercules because that was demigod, but mortals essentially that proved themselves were able to become like lesser deities, right? So not always omnipotent, amazing, like all powerful beings. Sometimes they were just the best of what they did, and it represented. So again, similar to how I came up with mantles, like self-creation.
Okay.
So what was Denier? Why was he so important? So, Denier was the scribe of Ogma.
Oh.
Ogma. So I think I'm saying that right. So who's Ogma? We're gonna have a lot of this happen really soon. But Ogma was the neutral, unaligned greater god of inspiration, invention, and knowledge, and the patron of bards and the Faerunian pantheon. So big inside of Faerun, very big. Patron of the bards, and basically that's all you really like. That's Ogma was just pretty cool. Okay. Like just really chill. And essentially the most powerful god of knowledge known in Faerun. So this was like the god of knowledge. Like that would make sense why it was also the inspiration for bards, because their whole thing was gathering knowledge, telling stories about it. So basically this was like, a bard in god form.
Got it. Okay.
And so that is who the greater god was, and that's how you kind of see, there's always a hierarchy. So the greater gods have lesser gods under them. So his scribe was Denir, and that's why he was the lesser god of, considered art, calligraphy, glyphs, images, knowledge, literature, scholars. That was his realm, right? So underneath Ogma, this was his sitting. Kind of like if you think of in Christian theology, think of Metatron, the scribe of God. Right. Like same concept, but not directly to the highest God, but a God, kind of a scribe of God. So, because Ogma was the god of knowledge, and Denir as well was the god of scripts, and basically a preserver of knowledge, you can kind of see where this is going to go. And so essentially what ended up happening is throughout the servitude, throughout the years, Denir always showed a fascination or a pull to the value of written word. Basically, the idea of preservation of knowledge. I mean, being under the greater god of knowledge, being a god of knowledge himself, and of glyphs, of scribes, his whole purpose was the preservation of knowledge. So, think of like in our modern time, he'd be like the one who probably got the Library of Alexandria built. Like that would have been like his thing to the world kind of idea. Right. So his whole thing was being a scribe of the god of knowledge. He wants to preserve as much. So his whole deal was, get scribes out there, get people knowing how to read and write, get that knowledge on paper so it could last. We've already talked about all of that, his domains. If you guys are interested, this is kind of cool. I always loved how the old school versions, they always had like symbols and etiquettes and things for each deity. Right. So his symbol, Denir's, is an eye with a candle or a lit candle above an eye, representing the enlightenment through written knowledge. So an eye and a candle above it.
Interesting. Okay.
Kind of cool.
Interesting.
His followers were known as Denirith, and they were devoted to preserving and spreading knowledge. They often worked as scribes, scholars, and librarians. His clerics were also known for their meticulous recording of histories, transcribing texts, and preserving rare manuscripts. They believed that every piece of knowledge is a fragment of the divine.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah.
I kind of really like that concept, that every piece of knowledge is like some fragment of
the greater. And it makes sense, because I guess how I make High Point work, that does make sense. Everything is a piece of something. So where does this all tie in with the metatext? Because we have Denir, the lesser god of Ogma. Denir even got a church. It is the Church of Denir. We've already talked about his followers and what they're all about. But where does this basically all grant on the metatext, right? Because the metatext, from all we really know officially lore-wise, is a metaphysical text. Like, it is an actual tangible metaphysical idea, right? It is something. It's just not within the grasp of what anyone would normally consider like mortalhood, right? Like, right. It is something out there, but it is metaphysical. It's beyond understanding. And it was always understood or said to grant access to all of the secrets of the multiverse.
Okay.
So that's a big difference here, because this is not isolated. Like in my worlds, like in the way that I look at lore, metatext is not isolated to a crystal sphere. It is not isolated to a module.
Is that what you would consider D&D's version of the multiverse, is multiple crystal spheres?
No.
Interesting.
It's so much more than that. Because we've talked about this before too. How, like, the Cataclysm, we talked about this in the Cataclysm discussion, the Cataclysm of High Point, and that's part of the Origins. I think I did an episode specifically called the Cataclysm NPCs, or Witnesses to the Cataclysm was the episode. Yes. And the thing is in D&D lore, the multiverse as we know it exists. In D&D lore, D&D universe, like our universe has, Milky Way Galaxy, Andromeda Galaxy, D&D universe has crystal spheres. That is not multiverse, that's just the D&D universe.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how I look at it. D&D has admitted that there is a multiverse. D&D lore, and I've shown this on stream because we've gone through this with the Cataclysm, D&D lore has proven that the Greek pantheon exists somewhere. Not in a crystal sphere, not in the D&D universe. It exists in its own universe.
Some
dimension. Like all of everything that happened to them happened. All of the Egyptian gods, they are in their own universe, right? Everything does exist. Earth, as we know it, our Earth, our world, real live modern day, exists in D&D, in the multiverse. This universe exists officially in D&D. And that's how they also explain why we have our histories, because bleed over.
Right.
Because, sometimes people blend over. But in D&D, official D&D lore, Earth, our universe, non-magical universe exists as it exists right now, as we know it. The Greek pantheon exists in their own universe. All of those are part of the multiverse, but not necessarily inside D&D, right? So we already know all of this, and that's why this is so important, because the metatext was not... That's why it was vague, but it was meant to touch all of it. And D&D has been very clear that all of these places exist separate from each other.
Okay.
And that's why the metatext having this concept, because here we go, right? So it even says here, all the secrets of the multiverse, it was considered to be sacred. It was considered to be a sacred idealization of the Church of Denier, and it was basically like their envisionment of like the holy text, like the ultimate holy text.
Bible. Okay.
So cosmology. Let's talk about how this works. So the cosmology of the known universe, at least in D&D, right? We first learned of like the primaterial plane, and there was the world of Toril, and that was a crystal sphere, right? Toril and a couple other planets. Boom. That was it. That was where the crystal sphere concepts came from.
Okay.
But they kept expanding the cosmology. They have other planes of existence, but that's still all within D&D, right? But you see here, we have cosmological models. We have the primaterial plane. We have anomalous planes. So that's where it kind of gets really interesting, because we have all of the D&D stuff. We have the world axis, cosmology post spell plague, so post cataclysm. Right. So all of those things. You have the primaterial plane, right, where it's all the stuff that we talk about. But here's part of the interesting lore. At first, it was thought that there was an infinite number of primaterial planes.
Okay.
Among them, the primaterial plane within which Toril resided, the Aberranian plane, the Aberranian material plane, the Othrian material plane, the Kryn material plane, and the universe in which Earth was located.
Interesting.
As the existence of other worlds started to be confirmed, each of the cosmological models had a way of explaining how they connected, related, or coexisted with one another. Of course, the scholarly inhabitants of each world thought that theirs was the primaterial plane. But even early cosmological models show that this was just a point of view. Other material planes discovered in this way included the Aberranian, the Othrian, the Terrian. A world called Earth was located here, in which little was known, but which was visited by one of the D&D people, wherein he met a scholar there named Ed of the Greenwood. And then anomalous planes, you have like places like the Far Realm and other stuff. So again, the multiverse includes our universe, and there's other doctrine or other like documents that talk about like the Greek pantheon, the Roman pantheons, like all of those places exist. Everything is out there in its own plane of existence, its own universe, right? And then we all have some sort of connection, right? So that's what I always found really interesting, is D&D accepted that all of these places are real. they're all separate, right? D&D is its own location, but D&D has come to Earth, like has come to our universe. So I love that. I've played with that in, the history of High Point as well. It's how the Cataclysm worked out, why I have all the influences, because at the Cataclysm they all met.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
That is the metatext. The metatext was believed to give you the secrets of the multiverse, right? But that was only one side of the lore. It was just the secrets. It was a book of sorts. It was information. But then other people started to wonder, well, what could happen is it possible to manipulate the text? Is it possible to write in the text? Is it possible to delete the text, edit the text? What happens when you mess with the text of the universe? And as I said, when you first talked about what is metatext, you're very close, because while it was primarily it began as a belief of knowledge, of just pure knowledge, of just
this is where you get information from.
I just know anything. Like when we talk about in real world physics, when we say if we could truly know the exact state of any moment in the universe, like the exact state of every particle period, we'd have all of the knowledge we need to map out the entire universe's past and history. The problem is we don't have that much knowledge. There's not enough computation power to crunch those numbers. But if we did, we'd have every answer, right? And that's kind of what this is. If you had this knowledge, you could answer any question. You knew how anything could possibly be done, which is interesting, right? There's an interesting concept there. The metatext is supposedly gives you knowledge of the multiverse and knowledge of things that you can't possibly know. And you also brought up the connection to prophecy, which I also found really interesting. Now, I will say this, in High Point, they are not the same thing.
For sure.
But they are quite intertwined.
I would imagine, at least on some level.
And there's also another episode I talked about where I talked about Vixie's character, Ness, and I talked about her history with the heart scale pendant. And there's a big controversy over the heart scale pendant. And I think I did this on, I think I discussed this on stream, but I discussed the whole big deal about the heartstone pendant, right? About its creation. I did just recently listen to this episode, so that's why it's fresh on my mind. So I did an episode where I talked about the heart scale pendant that Vixie's character Ness was going after. And the creation of the heart scale pendant was big controversy because there was someone who basically had it commissioned to be created for a purpose, and had to convince a bunch of people to allow him to make it because it was a very dangerous item. But essentially, he convinced everybody that he was doing it for noble reasons and it was okay and safe. So somehow he manipulated the way for them to let him create this magical item, which essentially, the heart scale pendant essentially had the ability to control any dragon in existence. If you filled it up, because it was like basically a vial.
Right.
If you filled it up with their blood, you had command of them. Nobody in the dragon community wanted him to make this, but he had this very compelling story, and he was able to win with it. So he had the item commissioned. But the biggest controversy of it is that at the same time there was a magical item that was directly linked to the prophecy. It was a very important item that needed to be done in order to enact a prophecy. And it was theorized about, you can't undo a prophecy, right? So it was always known, like at least anciently in mythos-wise, that like if you were to destroy something as part of the prophecy would work itself out, right? Like if you believe this person was part of the prophecy, you killed them and it turns out to be their son. Or you killed the son and it turns out to be the grandfather. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, no matter what, you're never quite right. And so it was always theorized that even if you held an item you knew was part of a prophecy, if you destroyed it, the prophecy would find a workaround. But no one ever knew exactly what that process was. They just always knew that you couldn't stop the prophecy, it would just find a workaround. So at the same time that he had the heart scale pendant created, he devised a plan and was able to arrange for said prophetic item to be destroyed, simultaneously as his commissioned item was being created. And that commissioned item became the new prophetic item. And nobody to this day knows how he did it. That's always been a controversy in High Point. This was a big deal. This is what created.
I remember you talking about that.
Because this is what created a big ass war. They locked him away in that secret vault that is now the heart scale pendant is the key to that vault. That's the whole point. Is it became the key. And no one knows how he did it. No one knows how possibly it could have been done in the first place. But now we're talking about metatext, about, information that's unknown. I wonder if there's any connection there.
Hint, hint, wink, wink.
So, moving forward, the metatext is a bunch of knowledge that people shouldn't have. And sometimes, if you can get just little snippets of it, it gives you glimpses into things you shouldn't know. Are those two things connected? I don't know. Maybe that was just a random tangent. But
we all love random tangents here.
Going back to Denier. So, what happened? Well, he's the lesser god of knowledge. He's a scribe. What does he do? He writes shit down. So, the metatext,
Facts.
as we know, is this ideological idea of all of the knowledge. Just the perfect knowledge. Knowledge you shouldn't have about the entire multiverse. It is believed to be, it contains, kind of like what you said earlier, it contains all possible knowledge. And the followers of Denier, their whole purpose was not just idolization, but their mindset was they strove to understand and transcribe this text. The whole point was they not only idolized the idea of it, but they actually believed in creating it, making it a book. They wanted to actually learn the metatext, because that was Denier's whole obsession, right? Document everything. So his followers were basically devoted to learning, identifying, and transcribing the metatext at all costs. That was their ultimate goal. If you had the cultist level goal of his followership was that. Now, this is another little piece of lore. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but we've already talked about this too in the Cataclysm, and this is normal D&D lore. Because right around this time of the Spell Plague, Denier tried to stop it. He tried to save the weave from collapsing.
Right.
And I use this part of the Cataclysm, because in the Cataclysm I talked about how Denier was there, and he also basically, same thing in the lore, he tried to stop the Spell Plague / the Cataclysm from happening. And in lore, the way he did this, at least the way that it is, the lore itself states, because again, none of this is, most of these details are not hard fact. These are literally, by D&D standards, this is what, quote unquote, what people believe. It's literally, even in D&D, it's not this is what happened. It is so as far as everyone knows. So again, I love the idea that they even to this day, they're no one's seen Denier. As far as everyone knows, this is what happened. But even they weren't this is exactly what happened. It's the
shrug emoji.
As far as anyone knows, meaning no one knows, which is fine. It's okay to have an unknown if no one knows. But you know what that also tells me? It tells me as a DM, it's my job to make it make sense. Yeah. It's my job to either keep it a secret or use that vagueness, right? So what did I do? What happened? When the Spell Plague happened, when Shar killed Astara and the weave collapsed, Denier tried to stop it. He tried to stop the collapse, tried to stop the Spell Plague from happening by writing himself and the weave himself into the metatext and the weave itself. He literally tried to write himself as a entity into the metatext and the weave to try to fix it. He basically tried to patch it with himself. And according to lore, Denier was lost that day.
Interesting.
Everyone believes that he was lost because he attempted to write himself into the metatext to save the weave from collapse. And that's it. That's where the lore ends. And that's all it says, is it's believed that that's what he did. He was lost to the metatext because he tried to write himself into it. So, did he succeed? Is he in the metatext? Is he the metatext? Did the metatext take him over? Is it just too powerful that he's now just a bit inside of a giant AI computer? Or is he surfing it? Is he just part of the, that's just all we know. But that's what I used it in the Cataclysm, is he was there at the Cataclysm. He did the same thing. He tried to stop it from happening, wrote himself in the metatext. I didn't change D&D lore. I just pinpointed a few loophole or a few areas. Yeah, I just made
a couple extra details
because there is none, right? So what happens? If I say that Denier did this, it doesn't change lore. If I just add in he stopped by the Cataclysm before he did it, it doesn't change. No one knows what happened to him right before he did it. We just know he wrote himself into the metatext and was lost. So what big deal that I said he stopped by real quick to save the world, right? So again, that's where Denier was. He was a scribe, And it wasn't like the metatext was Agma's like word. He was just a scribe who became obsessed with transcribing all knowledge and became obsessed with this metatext. Eventually discovered enough about it, obviously, because he had done a lot of discovery on it. We'll get into this a little bit, but Denier is actually known to have actually compiled metatext, like the metatext, like not in its entirety, but he transcribed it. Well, yeah, he transcribed it and actually had it documented, which is why he was able to write himself into it. And that's why his followers are so devoted to it, because they lost him to it. So the idea is they know it's real, right? So yeah, really interesting that, again, so at first, I like to point all this out, because at first, like I said, the original idea about the metatext was it's just a body of knowledge, right? That's all we were told. It's a body of knowledge. It just tells you all of the knowledge and the secrets of the metaverse, of the multiverse. Until this one specific line. Because we know that Denier, up until this point, based on his lore, has been transcribing the metatext, meaning he's been documenting it. That's fine. He wrote himself into it. That is the line that changes absolutely everything about the metatext. Because it was only ever thought of as, if you knew this knowledge, what could you do with it? And then there was the idea of, man, imagine if you could change it, right? It's that, like, you go into a video game and you're like, man, imagine if I could change the code. You're never going to think about doing that until you become a computer programmer and go, oh, I can actually write a script and hack this program and do it, right? That's basically what that's basically what these tiny little sentences. Remember, this is not a giant paragraph. These are like little sentences of Denier transcribed some of the metatext. One day he wrote himself into it. That's it. Those are the 2 bullet points we have. But that says so much. Because not only was he able to read it, transcribe it, keep it, and document it, he was able to manipulate it. He wrote himself into it, meaning he changed something. He was able to change the metatext.
So let me ask you this. Do you hear that and say that something that did exist in the metatext is no longer what it was and is now something else? Or do you hear that and say he added a line to the end of the metatext like he had done in the past, and he included himself in that line to do a specific thing?
And that's the thing, is like when it comes to this, that's why I love how vague it is because did he even succeed? Did his attempt to even touch the metatext? Because it's one thing to transcribe, but then to intentionally try to change. What if that destroyed him? What if the reason he didn't succeed?
I'm curious, when I don't know the full context of the line that you're referring to, but it almost sounds like Demeter it was his job to add to it. But when I hear transcribe, I almost think about how people will transcribe text into a different language. So it's like, hey, I just need...
That's what he was doing. So when I say transcribe, I just mean that he found the metatext and put it to pen to paper. Like he was actually documenting what the metatext was, but just one-to-one comparison. He was documenting chunks of what we could understand as metatext.
The metatext.
Exactly. And that's all he was able to do. Until this one line in his lore... The only line we have is literally a one sentence that says, during the spell plague, Denier was lost when he attempted to write himself into the metatext and the weave. That's all we have is one sentence that says he attempted and he was lost doing so. So that begs the question, yes, it's up to us to decide, did he succeed? Is he still there? Or did even attempting to touch this obliterate him? Right?
And
did he make a mistake?
Look like?
Yeah, so again, there's this idea of we don't know what happened to him. We just know he attempted to do it. But it does incite the idea that modification, at least the attempt of it, is tangible. What it does to you is left up to question. But it's there. So, the idea that he attempted to change it tells me, not that he was able to, but what it tells me is that he understood enough about it that he thought it was possible.
So here's the other thing that this begs the question, because again, when you talk about like writing it down and like making it physical, right? That also makes me feel like is it not physical already?
No, the metatext is metaphysical. It is
So then what is he transcribing?
Well, he's a god. So he's not writing a book the way we imagine it. It's a fourth dimensional book, if you would.
Like, is what he's writing or what he's transcribing to a physical book?
Both. Like, being a god, I don't imagine he has a quill and a standard book with pages and he's just writing words and symbols. I imagine him transcribing it is a body of text only gods can look at and handle. Like, we would not be able to fathom what his transcribing means. But what he does is he transcribes it just like you would take a Bible that's written in Latin and then give a sermon because you know Latin but no one else does. I imagine what he did was he found the metatext, transcribed it in a way that he, as a deity and other deities, can understand, and then he used that to sermon to his followers and his clerics to then pass his knowledge. I don't necessarily imagine that it was anything a mortal ever looked upon or even touched. It's always been a theoretical idea, but we do know that the deity himself did transcribe it, and we do know that the metatext does have, on occasion, a physical form. It's just, it in its entirety isn't a physical thing. It's a metaphysical thing, but it does get represented occasionally. Pieces of it can't, because remember, part of the lore behind it is believed that every piece of knowledge, every written text is part of the metatext, kind of like every number in pi is technically part of every algorithm. It's that same thing of you just may not be able to understand the piece you have, but technically everything's the metatext. It's just that it's like if you took any chunk of pi, that's not a code. But if you knew how to read pi and you knew how to read code, if you looked long enough, you'd be like, oh, look at that. That's an algorithm. I could literally copy paste that into a computer and it would run a program. But like you said, if you just looked at pi, are you going to see that?
Right.
But if you knew how to read it, and that's what I imagine that's what Denier did. He saw bits and pieces of the code everywhere. He saw the snippets that people just saw as random. But over time, he saw the patterns and said, oh, I can actually go, that means something. And then he can take that and give it to his followers. And he goes, that means something. And that's what he was documenting. He wasn't going chapter 1, let me write it all down. It was more of a, kind of like what you're doing with your business. You're finding code that works. You're finding things that no one else knows. And you're like, I'm going to document that.
Yeah.
And then you find other things and you're like, oh, but if I rearrange, oh, now it's making sense. And you're putting it together. That's what I believe he was doing. But, because that's what he wanted. He wanted to document. He wanted to be historical about it. But again, it's not that he succeeded. That's not what I'm tied upon. He believed it was possible because he attempted. The fact that it just says, because we have no other time that it's ever been said that anyone ever messed with the metatext. They just tried to read it. They tried to obtain it.
So there are others that have tried to read it and obtain it, and
like,
now obtain it makes it feel like it's something.
Understand it, like be able to even begin to fathom it, which is why it was really only Denier who was known for it. Him and his followers, right? It's their goal, but he was really the star of the show, right? He was really the only one to ever truly touch it, which is why losing him was such a big deal. Because that's literally the only person to truly ever know the metatext is gone, which is why his followers continue, and they're the ones like it is stated that like his followers can find bits and pieces, so they've transcribed, they've documented tiny little unimaginably fathomable bits of it, but because of his following, they know how to see that there are patterns in that code.
Yes.
But what they write isn't anywhere near what he wrote, because again, they have to write it in mortal terms. He wrote it in divine terms. And this is writing that's even beyond the divine, right? So it's these layers of dilution. But it is very interesting. We have other people who have tried to gain the knowledge. We know of other people who wanted the knowledge. But he's the only one we know of who have ever even once attempted it, to mess with it. And the one time we know he attempted to mess with it, gone. But the fact that he attempted tells me one thing and one thing only. The one person obsessed with it thought it was possible. And to me as a DM, working with High Point, that's all I need to run with my own versions of what the metatext is. Because I don't need the proof. I don't need a tangible D&D Wizards of the Coast needs to tell me, is the metatext messable? Like, can I do anything with it? That is juicy enough for me to be like, oh, that's fun. that is such a cool concept of the first and only person to ever touch it to try to manipulate it is just gone. That's an adventure all of its own.
Oh, heck yeah.
So that's who Denier is. That's the beginning levels of what we know about the metatext, right? And again, we're talking a lot about it, but these are bullet points of sentences that say things, right? Like, we're embellishing a lot about the actual lore, and you guys can see it on the screen. Like, the metatext, it doesn't say much. Like, this is it. Look. That's two.
But I mean, that's what we have to go off, right? Because that's all we got.
But I love it. 2 sentences, and then look, we're already at appendix. This is it. 2 sentences. Nature, powers, and history. Look at this history. Legend states, this is the whole history of the metatext. Legend stated that the mortal Denier ascended to divinity and took the role of Ogma's deficient right hand. So again, he was mortal. This is what we talk about lesser gods. Like, compared to what we think of a deity, we in our D&D worlds think of like these omnipotent beings who have held mantles of power or were always around. Mm-hmm. This is a mortal who just got so good at knowledge that Ogma was like, yeah, come on up here. I need you to write for me. Like, basically he was elevated. So that's what I mean by we consider these lesser gods. But think about this. This was a mortal who made it to a lesser deity position. But this is the person that we know of that messed with the metatext of all things. Not the actual god of knowledge, but his subordinate is the one who mastered metatext. That's what I mean by when I said earlier, we would consider this a lesser god. Not just because he's a lesser deity, but quite literally, a mortal-made god is not who I would have thought could master the metatext. But then again, that's very D&D, and it's also very mythos of like what's the one that Allo is based off of? It starts with the D as well. Oh, the guy who went with to basically get his lady back. From Hades.
God bless America.
It's the one who turned into stone, right? Because he turned around.
Well, I don't think he turned into stone.
Or she turned into stone because he turned around. Remember, his whole point was he went down there, played great music for Hades. Hades loved it so much, said, yes, you can leave with your wife, but you can't turn around until you leave. And the 2 steps away, turned around, stoned, gone. I forget his name. Starts with a D. But is that Demeter? I think you said that. No, that wasn't Demeter.
No,
that's a Greek.
I'll look it up.
But yeah, but basically, like, that's basically what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a mortal who impressed the gods, but he's the one who touched the metatext, just like you know that god or that mortal was able to impress Hades. So that's one sentence of the history. Let's go to the next couple sentences. In the year of Blue Fire, 1385 DR, the goddess Mystara was assassinated by Cyric with the aid of Shar. Upon the goddess's death, the weave, which allowed for the use and manipulation of magic, began to collapse. So you said you don't know the whole history. Here is the sentence. Denier attempted to stabilize the weave by writing himself and the metatext into the weave, but was believed to have been destroyed in the process. Period.
So, interesting. He specifically says, I tried to write myself and the metatext
into the weave. He tried to blend all 3. He tried to use the metatext to basically stabilize the weave using himself and the text itself. And then, again, was believed to have been destroyed in the process, meaning
I'm still hung up on that last sentence.
Oh yeah, just to stabilize the weave by writing himself and the metatext into the weave.
Into the weave.
But that's all we know. That's the only sentence we've ever heard.
Like, if I'm trying to analyze what that sentence even means, if I'm trying to analyze what it means to okay, if I'm going to use that same sentence in different words, I'm going to write Kage and the Sorcerer's Stone into a pot of spaghetti.
No, see, so
right?
so this is how I take that.
You know what I mean?
What I take that as the weave is about to be destroyed. The metatext is all knowledge, all secret. It is literally the fabric of everything. What's written is. So I read that as he knows the metatext so well, he believes he can manipulate it. I believe that when he says he tried to write himself and the metatext into the weave, he tried to literally change the narrative of reality and say the weave is not collapsing. My power is going into the weave, and I'm literally telling the metatext, my power is now in the weave, and you are going to make it... like, I believe it's almost like, imagine like you were telling me that that story about the girl... Imagine if a character in that story was like, no, author, you are going to say that this is like, I imagine what he's literally doing is he's trying to basically pull a fourth wall.
Again,
and when he writes himself, I imagine that what he's literally trying to do is just change reality. He's literally trying to rewrite history, time, and say, if I use my power to stabilize it, and he failed.
This might be a little pedantic and like, you know, word lawyery, but it would feel like if I was gonna say that, I would say I would write myself in the weave into the metatext. But and the reason why is because
I totally understand that
is what's holding all the things.
I mean, you also got to understand who and when this was written. I mean, again,
that's why I said,
you know,
it is very possible that it's a little pedantic and like it just I'm being too choosy about the words, kind of like we were talking about last
it's
time
a preference.
It's
a preference.
But what makes a lot of sense is it's like, you know, is the metatext what it is, or is the metatext the container, or is the weave the container? Is magic what holds the reality together, or is what the metatext says about reality what holds reality together?
And this is why I love why they didn't answer these questions, is because you and I now get to take these questions and answer them ourselves.
And that's exactly where I'm going with this. Is like the mindset that.
Because there are no answers. That's what I love about this. At this point, we are now beyond answers. The questions you're asking right now.
They're beyond answers that they have given us, but they're not beyond answers that can be ordained. And
exactly.
I believe we're
you
the
can
ones
choose,
that,
but that's my point. Is you can choose what you like to know about it. But that's why I love the fact that I think that this was one of the best parts about old D&D is not having the answer. It's not about you and me deciding who's right or wrong. It's about us coming to a narrative conclusion of what works. Like in High Point, what I've chosen the metatext to be works beautifully in High Point. And that's all it needs to work for is High Point, right? I don't need my version of the metatext to work for you. I don't need my metatext to work for D&D 5th edition. And that's what I love about it is when you get through that mind field, when you finally get through that maze of this and decide what these words mean. If you want to be pedantic and be like, no, it should have said this. If he said this, then he meant this because he's a god of knowledge, right? He's very wordy. He should have known his word. But then again, he's not the one who said it, right? This is the people after the fact. It's the people who survived who weren't there, right? Like, so there's a lot of fun things. This is why I love it. I absolutely love that they did not give us this answer because there's nothing for us to argue about. You know what I mean? Like, no one can be right simply because it's going to be what makes the most sense to us. Because I do agree with you. I don't necessarily like that wording in the way that I would have preferred it to be said. Oh, here's the next part, too. We have one more piece of lore for it, too. At some point, the Denarian scholar, of some name I can't pronounce, attempted to recreate the metatext in the tome Metatext Rebound. For that heretical action, she was excommunicated from the Denarian church. So, while the church itself has this, like, need to preserve and get the metatext, at the same time, one of their own essentially doing it on their own and trying to like compile this ancient secret knowledge was also wrong because they did it themselves, not through the church. Like the church wants to protect it, right? Like the organization wants to, but one of their own basically went out of their way to do it and they got excommunicated. But the Metatext Rebound is an actual doctrine. It is one of the only mortal realm physical copies of anything related to metatext, and it's believed to be gone. It was believed to be destroyed, but do you really think the church destroyed any actual remnant of the metatext? So again, they don't tell you what happened to it. They just know that it was created, they got excommunicated, and the church took the book, assuming to destroy it. I think they just took it and kept on building it. Because Metatext Rebound was collection of writings that sought to reconstruct the metatext. So they were esoteric knowledge that Denier once had. So the idea being that since the metatext isn't something that you can like physically hold, it was more of this was the best collection of the knowledge the metatext granted you. I guess that would be a better way of saying that.
Okay.
But I'm curious. So, where is your mind going with this? Because I know how metatext works for High Point. Like, but again, this is all I've ever had to work on. These sentences right here is all I've ever gone on. It's a vast amount of knowledge. The deity who once transcribed it thought he could change it and attempted to write himself into the weave with the metatext. And I personally took that as I'm going to tell the metatext, change the story, and force my deity-like power to be what... Because again, Mystara was a deity, held the weave together. So I'm imagining my narrative was he tried to write himself and his power, what Mystara was doing, and say, hey, I don't need to be alive for it, just use my power to do whatever Mystara was doing to keep it alive. And he was basically trying to say, I can use the metatext to do this because the metatext can change what the universe says is happening. So when he says, wrote the metatext into the weave, basically saying that the metatext says the weave can't die, so therefore I wrote it into it that the weave can't collapse. That was my interpretation. Whether or not that works, again, it works for High Point, but I see where you were going. It doesn't quite work with the wording. So I want to know where are you taking it, especially with the wording that you see.
Well, I mean,
let's go back to
just what I was saying. You know, like when I hear that wording, it makes me think that which one's the container, which one's doing the holding, which one's doing the keeping together.
So if that's the case, I like that question, and I would think it would be the metatext, because what we know is that the weave, at least in D&D, is what gives you access to magic. So magic isn't... The weave and magic are synonymous, but not necessarily one and the same. But we also know magic doesn't exist everywhere, like in Earth. But if the metatext covers all...
Is it that it doesn't exist, or is it that it isn't accessible? People don't know how to touch it.
So... That's a unique one, because in the D&D lore, when it talks about Earth, there are mentions of our history and our lore about magic. And in the D&D side of belief, it is theorized that maybe once upon a time, Earth was closer, their prime material plane was closer to the magical planes. So when we talk about lore and magic in the Earth and what we used to believe in it, the D&D lore is that we were closer to those other planes and there was overlap, and we've just drifted further away, so we don't have access to it. But then there's others that essentially indicate or like the wording basically says Earth was a magicless universe. Like, we just exist in a magicless place. So which one actually means it? It's always, that one's even more vague than this stuff.
I mean, I would, if they're genuinely talking about this Earth, like the Earth that you and I presently exist in, then I would ask, in our actual Earth's history, is there a such thing as magic? Is there a such thing as witchcraft? Is there a such thing as, and do these things, are they demonstrably able to perform what would be considered magical feats?
Right.
Things that literally, like, we have science and we don't yet know how to explain. Do we still to this day have unexplained events that are claimed to be some sort of, you know, voodoo or whatnot, you know?
And technically we do, but those always end up getting explained with science. So it's like, we don't believe in the D&D level of magic. And that's what I love about, like, the idea that Earth has a history of believing in magic, but not a functional working of magic. So I love the idea that we once had magic. It's where our beliefs came from, and then we separated out. Also, Split Infinity, the Apprentice Adept series, also discusses this, specifically because it has the two worlds, one of magic, one of science. In the book series, they even discuss Earth, because Earth is just another planet from Proton, and they discuss that the ancient understanding of magic, like just the ancient idea that magic was real, is believed to have once been Earth having a twin that had a curtain. And that's how I do it in High Point, because again, High Point, the reason why the crystal sphere is so big is because it's, you know, it covers an entire galaxy, and that galaxy has Proton in it, which is where the anomaly, you know, the alternate version. But that's the beautiful part is, well, if my anomaly is phase and on the other side of phase is Proton, that technically exists in that lore in our universe, in our galaxy, then if High Point is essentially the phases universe, in my opinion, that means that in High Point, the original Earth that had magic exists in High Point, but no longer is in sync. I would believe it's the idea it's no longer in sync with Earth anymore, like our Earth, like in the overlap, kind of like how Proton and Phase can get out of sync, and so they can't cross. That's how I like the lore to think of it.
I would say that I've heard too many stories, and this one in particular sticks with me. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it before, but there was a man that thought himself to death. He literally thought himself to death. He was a refrigerator repairman. He went onto this train to repair one of the refrigerators, and the door got closed on him, and he was tripping out. He even recorded himself saying, like, I'm going into hypothermia, I'm going into shock, I'm gonna die soon. And they literally found him in there dead the next day with all the symptoms of hypothermia, and the refrigerator was broken. It was not on. There was no reason he should have froze, but he did. There's no reason he should have died, but he did. It wasn't like he was in there for an excessive period of time that I genuinely believe that there is some truth to the fact that our minds have the ability to affect reality. There's an experiment that I've seen done countless times where, you just take 2 jars of rice and you say kind words to one, you say hateful words to another every day for a month. At the end of that month, one jar is going to be black and rotten, and the other jar is going to just be a jar of rice. And like it has been scientifically proven that humans produce an electromagnetic field, and that electromagnetic field can increase or decrease. And so at the end of the day, like, I believe that there is something to be said with the way that our minds believe about things, and like how that can affect their reality. And so the way I would look at what magic is and how it's represented, because even in one of my favorite animes, Full Metal Alchemist, there are 2 separate worlds, and again, nobody likes this version because it's not the Brotherhood version, but like the very first version, like the other side of the gate was the side of the gate where they went the route of the steam engine and science instead of alchemy and magic, so to speak. And so
there seems to be a lot of that in a lot of the different like culture, like pop culture references of the complete separation. There's not a lot of them that meld science and magic. A lot of them try to do that,
because
like
they're
idea of separation.
Opposing ideologies, and it would be very challenging to mix a lot of them. I think D&D is one of the only places where you actually have like, cyberpunk-ish stuff as well as, magic stuff, But when you think about, I want to be able to explain everything that's happening versus stuff just works, right? And that's kind of the idea of magic. It's like, I want it to happen, and so therefore it does. Like, I choose it to happen, and I don't necessarily believe that, hey, we can just wave wands and the stuff can happen, but I do believe that we do not understand the extent in which we can affect the world around us. And so I think that when I think about how magic would work in D&D, or how magic would work across multiverses and things like that, it makes sense to me that the reality is a lot more of kind of like when you think of Jedi, and like they're tapping into the midichlorians that are in everybody. Everyone has access to it. It's like, how do you go about accessing it?
So I still think that with all of that explanation, it still seems that it would indicate that the metatext is the container then, because the metatext, even in that respect, would be dictating the ebb and flow of it, right? The metatext is what would say Earth right now doesn't have the access that D&D universe does. So in that particular case, it's, the magic is affected by what the metatext says. Because the metatext we have no reference to the metatext being affected by magic. The weave collapsing didn't affect the metatext. The metatext was attempted to be used to fix the weave, right? So even they believed the metatext was stronger than the weave. And the metatext still exists. The metatext is still around. So to me, that even would still lend more credence to the metatext is the container that gives purpose and gives direction to the energy that still is everywhere. It just gives it its variations, right?
And I would say that is correct. conceptually, based upon everything that's been described that you've brought up thus far. But I would also say, again, the information that we've read, these few sentences that we've read, I don't know if that is supposed to have been... Is that supposed to have been written down in some physical book in D&D lore that some actual individual wrote? Or is that just like reading the DMG and it's just information about the world that it's our version of meta-knowledge of the world?
I just look at that as more of, that's the colloquial answer. It's the legend. When you ask anybody, they just know of Denier was lost when he tried to save the collapse using the metatext. So I don't necessarily believe that these specific words outside of this website these were the specific words. I've always looked at it as, with anybody who knows of Denier and what happened, this is the legend. The legend is, we all believe he was lost, and that's why I love it. We all believe he was lost. Everyone just knows he was lost, but no one actually was there.
If that's the case, and this is just legend has it, it's really easy for the verbiage of legend has it to be misquoted over and over again and incorrect over and over again.
And that's why I love the vagueness of it.
Or at the very same time, it could be the very reason why it didn't work. It's because, yes, he thought I could edit it. Yes, he thought I could do something with it, but he tried to do it in the wrong way. He tried to move the metatext into the weave to make the weave more powerful because but in reality, the metatext should have been the container. You should have tried to do something more simple. Like, imagine if the same concept that you brought up with the heart pendant, and how he was somehow able to get that heart pendant to replace the other key. Imagine if he was writing in the metatext, okay, Mystara was originally the one that held the weave together, and when she died, or the way it works when the person holding the weave together dies is almost like the Doctor when he gets regenerated, and it just kind of transfers to another person and somebody else does it, and it transferred to him. He tried to write himself as the person that it transferred to, and now I'm the one who does it. And maybe that is what he tried to do,
and that could have destroyed. Maybe he couldn't control
he wasn't powerful enough to do it.
And that's the thing, is because again, I take this as nobody was there to witness it. This wasn't like someone was documenting what happened. It's because we only have one sentence and it's indicative of the legend.
But my
it's
question
more of
is,
just,
where would this legend have come from?
Well, so for High Point, the Cataclysm, because again, technically people were there, but I look at this as more of this is what happens when someone goes, "Sir, where are you going?" And he's like, "I have to go try to stop this from happening. I have to see if I can do something." And you see him grab his book of the metatext and then he disappears. And then the next thing everyone knows is no one's ever seen him, and then he's gone. So the legend stirs of, well, the last time I saw him, it says he was going to go fix it, and I saw him grab his metatext. So he told someone, I am going to go try this, and then left to go try it. No one witnessed him do it, but someone knew of his intent. I believe that that's what the legend starts, right? Someone either interpreted or knew his intent, just no one witnessed it happen. And that's really interesting too, because what if he didn't die? What if he became enlightened to a point to where, what if he, in the moment he tried to stop the weave, the metatext froze all the time? It's that moment like in movies where it freezes all time, and the metatext opens up to him and says, "You can't stop this. You can't stop anything. Look, you've looked." Imagine he just literally tries to mess with the metatext so much that in that instant he gets it, and all of the metatext flushes into his head, and he's just like, "Oh, it was always going to happen this way. I can't do anything." And then just walks off. Like what if he's still alive? He's just, I'm not a god. I'm not any. And just, he's now so omnipotent. He's just like, existence is just existence. So what if he's not even dead? He just has no, what happened to Dr. Manhattan? In what's it called? Watchmen. Like when Dr. Manhattan became Dr. Manhattan, it was a human who got all of the knowledge to do anything and lost all connection to his humanity. Why? Because what is a human who doesn't have desires and needs? When all of your needs are met and you literally desire for nothing because at the snap of your fingers, you have literally matter manipulation. you stop caring, right? Like, you try to hold on to the humanity, like Dr. Manhattan did. He tried to save people, but after a while, he was like, it ain't worth it. I'm going to go make my own planet. And he just fucked off and did. And I believe that, what if that happened to Daenerys? What if he became so omnipotent, he looked at all other gods and went, nice try. Like, you don't get it. Nice try. You'll maybe one day. But you know what I mean? Like, what if it was just that? What if it was so simple that he just doesn't care? He can't care. Or what if he's so enlightened, he's like, I know too much. I'm still alive, but I am so dangerous because he knows all of that knowledge. So what if he's hiding?
Zen's got a interesting take. He says, I think the container is the flawed metaphor of the metatext. He thinks the metatext is...
The pen, Daenerys was the ink, and the weave was the work of art. That's an interesting one. I mean, the weave was long before him, so I would have to argue that I don't know about that.
There just might have been another pen before him.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting to think of. I do like the idea, like, the metatext is the pen. I kind of... That's an interesting idea of like how to think of that.
But I would think the metatext would expand much beyond just the weave.
Oh, it does.
You know, like,
well, and that's where my other high point, things. I mean, and we have a little bit more history too on this as well. So we've like I said, we have very little history, but we do have more other connecting history. Because this is so far as you guys have seen. That's it. We're done with the metatext's history. That's all we know about it. But there is some other times of mention. So before Daenerys died, there was some other notable incidences when he used it. So Daenerys was the scribe of Ogma. So we have the other god that we mentioned before, the one who helped Shar kill Mystara, Cyric. So Cyric was the Faerunian god of lies, trickery, strife, and strife. So basically, and he has domain over tyranny, murder, lies, intrigue, and illusion. So he's just Loki, just on steroids.
For sure.
Right? So Cyric also had a scribe, of course. Rinda. Rinda was the scribe of Cyric, and was the author of the Sinrashad and the True Life of Cyric. So, the Sinrashad is an unholy tome that was the scribe under the... Okay, so it was an unholy tome that the sole purpose of this tome... So she mastered this tome and she created it. The sole purpose of this tome was to increase Cyric's power. And the whole purpose of it, it was designed to increase his power. So, in old D&D, the size of deities, like, the power was like their worship, their spread, their belief. So the tome, if read, would turn anyone who read it into a devout worshiper of Cyric. It was basically a curse. You read this tome, and you were just, Cyric's my overlord.
Okay.
So it was like a virus to spread. And the idea with that, more worshippers, it would increase his power.
I guess this is not a tome you can just make a bunch of copies of.
Exactly. And it was of great power, and once one started reading it, could not willingly stop. So a cursed item. So it forced you wanted to read it. Once you started, you couldn't stop. Once you stopped, you were his bitch. And you could not willingly stop, and it even worked against other deities.
So if you could be a cleric of some other religion and you start reading this...
You could be a deity and read this. It worked against other deities, not just their followers. It worked against any mortal. That was the whole point. But this worked against deities themselves.
So a deity could theoretically become a devout follower of another deity?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Theoretically, how would that even work? Would all of that deity's followers' power now get siphoned right into...
Not necessarily. The idea would be that you just become a devout follower, so you become basically loyal. You're still the god of your domain, but you are now loyal to him. You now want to basically be his buddy. He says something, you get your guys to go do it. Like, it's an alliance thing. It's not necessarily you're now under his belief system, but you may be able to change your religion. You may want to change your religion after that. You may want to change little things about the people so they could better align with him. You wouldn't necessarily tell your followers to go follow, but he might convince you to have dual followership. make sure all your followers follow both of you. That can also happen.
Interesting.
So yeah, definitely a lot of craziness to it. Let's see. We have a description of it. Basically a black book, raven black leather. And the skull, the size of a child's fist, dominated the front cover.
That's aggressive.
So yeah, so interesting enough, a lot of stuff happened, but after its creation, after Rinda scribed this book, it was actually given to Ogma first for safekeeping, the god of knowledge, right? So it was given to them for safekeeping and protection. They tried to keep it hidden from Cyric, so they made this book, and then they basically got it out of his control and gave it to another god that says, don't ever let this come out. Like, don't ever let that happen. Because Cyric had, his scribe do it, and then someone named Mask convinced Cyric to let him hold on to the book for safekeeping, and then they basically stole it and said, yeah, you're not getting this back.
Yeah.
But they didn't keep it hidden from him forever. He eventually got it back. But what's also funny, here's the fun part. So Cyric finally got it back with the help of another deity. Eventually, just a bunch of intrigue. He got his own tome back. But he accidentally read it. He succumbed to the very curse of his own tome. Cyric read his own tome.
How does that even work?
I'll tell you, at one point, Cyric himself made the grave mistake of reading from the book. Though it was his own creation, he proved no more immune to its power than any other. The book instilled an unshakable belief in his own omnipotence and supremacy over the cosmos, instilling megalomania and even a degree of outright soliopism to his already fractured mind. Basically, he already thought he was the shit. This basically made him think that he was, like...
the shit of the shits.
Yeah. This gave... If he was already, like, egotistical, like, for a god, this gave a god delusions of grandeur. Like...
That sounds like a problem.
So yeah, that's I love that. I love that it was so powerful. Even he fell victim to it and just went more insane with his own stuff. So why I bring that up is because we do have a tie back to Denier. So one of the historical notes from Denier using the metatext is in the Siren Shot incident, the creation of this tome, this evil tome that is for turning people, right? The one that we were just talking about, the Cyric's tome. So, when it was being created by Cyric, it basically was trying to, he was trying to manipulate, reality, right? It's like a book that would manipulate reality, change someone's whole perspective. So that kind of fell into Denier's a little bit realm. And Denier played...
or the metatext?
Both. It basically fell into the idea of reality manipulation. So he attempted to utilize the metatext. So what do I have here? So... so he basically, along with Ogum, they tried to also... It doesn't give, again, fractured information, but it's believed he tried to use the metatext to mitigate damage. Similar, not the same way that he tried to stop the collapse of the weave, but in the sense of he tried to use his knowledge of the metatext to downplay any of the damages caused by this tome and its manipulation of reality. What that means, we don't know. We don't have details of what he did, how he tried to use it. We just know that a bunch of deities, including Denier and Ogum, banded against Cyric again after he made this tomb. And with that, the metatext was somehow beneficial in limiting the damage of this tome. How does that work? We don't know. Again, these are fragments of information of lore, but they never told us, this is how we used it, this is why it was useful. It's just that Denier had access to bits and pieces, and it was useful to him up until the Weave incident. But what does that tell us? It tells us that it caught his attention because it's reality manipulation. Maybe the Weave helped him understand how the tome works, so they were able to reverse its effects. I could see that, like deities who understand the metatext could see how the tome affected a human's mind, and therefore they can undo it, kind of like a psionic with psychic surgery. I can kind of see that, but that's a stretch, right? It's very vague, but it's a stretch.
I see, initially, it feels like somehow that book got, I don't want to say connected to the metatext, but it almost feels like whenever that book is read, it rewrites.
Well, and who's to say that Rinda, the other scribe, because again, we know that Denier was the one who like paved the way to understand the metatext, but that doesn't necessarily mean that other people didn't try. What if this was just another scribe who also attempted to understand the metatext and used part of it, very little bits of it, and that's why it got Denier's attention?
Imagine there was, like you were talking about pi, like there's a section of code that he tried to transcribe, and you tried to transcribe this element of the metatext into this book,
right?
Unknowingly or knowingly, and so that when it is read,
it changes reality.
You're basically changing, like, you, the person reading it, is changing what the metatext says about you.
And that's what I mean by it. There's these tiny little breadcrumbs that make me believe the metatext is more than just the written word. It's something that has a give and take. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just makes me believe that there's more to the metatext than just a book. But again, we're going to get into that a little bit more because I have my own theories, global, like my own personal theories of what really we're talking about when we talk about metatext. This is more about Denier. I have way too much information about Denier. We don't really care that much. Okay, so more about his followers. So the way that they've described his followers is that they go on quests to basically find lost works of literature and fragments of the metatext. That's all we really know. So again, what does that mean in terms of mortal physicalness? We know that the metatext is technically written in everything. So it's kind of like, again, I believe it's more of those, you're looking at pi and millions of rows of pi, and unless you know coding, you're never really going to know what any one particular chunk of numbers means. But the more coding you know, one day you're going to be like, that's a code. That works. You don't know what it does, but you recognize it as a series or a pattern. That's what I almost imagine is what
a simile for what pi is in this scenario. Like, yes, the metatext is pi, but what are they looking at? That they're pulling this code out of? Like, are they looking at just patterns in reality? Are they just looking at patterns in humans' behavior? Like,
so for me, the way that I've represented this, so I do have a character that I have in D&D that is essentially my representation of Denier. It's a fragment, if you will, of what's might be left of him. It's just my little call because I really like the character, or I really like the NPC, so this is the high point version of him, but it's not meant to be, it's not Denier himself, but it's essentially like an echo, a fragment of what was the remnant after the cataclysm. But he's very crazy, out there, outlandish individual. I kind of like throwing him in random places. He'll just kind of appear places, but I have written lore on how he does this, right? And it's because of the fragmentation and his issue with, not understanding. He understands the metatext. Again, it's like a fragmented piece of Denier. So the way I do it is it's very his way of doing it, because he's the only NPC in High Point who understands it to any degree. His is very much a like fourth dimensional approach. So his location, if you ever meet him, he's in essentially a very like his like place he lives at. It's kind of like a dilapidated like library, almost like Library of Alexandria, but almost disheveled. Just it looks like there's absolutely no rhyme or reason. Looks like things are just piled in random stacks, and there's just it looks like no one cares. Like he doesn't care, but he knows exactly where everything is. He knows almost like to a page any information you need, like to a page. But what's also interesting is he's very, very particular on where he puts things. And I always like really liked this aspect of like getting into this character of like every little thing just seems to have an exact place. And for those that are observant, every doorway, because this place isn't really like a indoor place. It's almost like, it looks almost outdoorsy, but it's like books and shelves kind of make up makeshift walls. So it's like kind of indoor, kind of outdoor. You're not really sure. But like all of the doorways and all of like the areas that go into like different sections are all lined and stacked, typically with like an archway of books. And my lore way around this is he doesn't get it, like it's not like Denier's level, but he feels, he understands what's going on. And so he can manipulate things around him to bring out the meta text. So a stack of books, to what you would look like a stack of books, if it's stacked in the right way and letters and page numbers and things are exactly aligned, it creates a bit of that meta text. So it's not just the words on the spine, but it's like the words inside the book, right? If I take this book and tilt it 90 degrees and then this one 10 degrees and then I stack these 3 books exactly like this, that creates, say, and I do that 3-4 times, that's now a doorway and a portal. I don't know how I did it, but it's the meta text and I'm manipulating it. So it's a 4th dimensional thing. It's not tangible as in something written down. It is literally, it is baked into everything. This particular character just seems to randomly manipulate that everything to piece together those little fragments of code. Now, it doesn't typically do a whole lot. Like, he's just more of a fun character to play, and he's just kind of a crazy character to be around. But his location is a hint at all of this, right? It's like a breadcrumb for more lore. But how I look at the metatext is, the metatext is metaphysical. It is a multi-dimensional aspect, but here's where I really do. In D&D lore, it can be manipulated in some ways. Very minimally, but it has manipulative ability, right? But I look at what really the metatext is to D&D. Oh, I wish I had my book. I wish I had my 2nd edition book. The metatext is rules as written. Officially, in High Point's point of view, metatext is everything in our world that we've written down. So everything that influences us, movies, books, novels, comics, all the D&D lore, every D&D book ever written, all of that's the metatext, because that is, from the D&D point of view, what makes the world. And when we homebrew, we are changing the metatext. We are deciding how things work to these characters, to these NPCs, the things that we like to play, the way we play from their perspective. All of the rules that they're bound by are the metatext. It is the fabric of reality. It is the rules that reality runs by, the rules that we control. I look at that as that is what the metatext is. It is essentially the unchangeable foundational rules. But however, just like what we do, things can be bent, things can be broken, things can be changed narratively for whatever reason, right? And that's where I believe that's where that gap closes with people like Denier being able to manipulate or attempt to manipulate the metatext. It's the in-game trying to break the 4th wall and homebrew itself. That's what I believe Denier was basically doing, is trying to homebrew the world he lived in. Where we homebrew it because we're extra-dimensional beings, right? We're able to manipulate D&D on a level no character in that world could fathom, because that world's in our head, right? Like, it's that level of, that's how I've always kind of, every piece of information I've always looked at is, the metatext is just that. It is the text we read in IRL. It is all of the rules, the foundations, all of the influences that make our worlds, that make our narrative, and the manipulation is just what we call homebrewing. It's the ways that we narrate, the ways that we've decided that that NPC is going to show up, the way that we decided that that castle looks today, the way we have to retcon information. It's all us changing the metatext, unbeknownst to the characters in the game. But once they learn meta knowledge, once they understand that there is a fabric, that there is a foundation, a rule that has been written. And what does the human mind do? Well, if it is written, can it be unwritten? Can it be changed? Can I take an R and make it look like an N? And that's where you get people like Denier. And that's where I believe that, yes, there is ways to manipulate it, but I believe that I like the idea that you can manipulate the metatext, but you can't change it, which is where my NPC comes in, right? Being able to stack books and make a portal or make a beacon or get information from it is a modification of what's there and a way to look at pi, right? Pi never changes. I can't change the order of pi. All I can do is read through it long enough to find the section that I need. that's kind of what I imagine that NPC does. He just manipulates it till he gets what he needs out of it, but you can't change it. And that's kind of part of the lore of why I believe what happened to Nier. He went one step too far. Instead of trying to work with what he had, he tried to change it. And that was something that you just can't come back from. Now, what happened to him, I still like to leave that open because he doesn't exist in High Point. So not even Zenith knows what happened to him. All we have is that fragment NPC as a homage to the character of the metatext. But that's my overarching understanding of the metatext personally. It is all of the things that have influenced me to be a DM and make my story. And I don't know, I kind of just, I feel like it's a very nice way of blending the reality of being a DM. Like I've always talked about like how I've made High Point represent both the story of High Point, but both my journey as a DM, right? The major wars have represented shifts in mindset. How like my very first war in High Point, the War of Power, was me learning to be a more strict DM, learning to stop giving players the freedom to do anything, right? Just stop being a yes man and being like, yeah, do whatever you want. It was me being like, no, there are rules. That's your hit points. That's how much you get. Stop it. Like, it was that, right? Like, so that's kind of why I like this idea of like the metatext can be manipulated but not changed, because it is that like metaphysical idea of Doctor Who isn't D&D, but I've been influenced by it. So that's my metatext. Within High Point, the metatext has been influenced by Doctor Who. I'm not going to change what Doctor Who is, but I am going to manipulate the information that it provided, if that makes more sense. So that's how I've always like approached it, because I love the idea of the metatext, but I want it to be something that's obtainable, reachable, tangible, but I also want it to always remain this forbidden knowledge. It's literally something in the game cannot change what created it, right? Like the character can't create the words that made it, but it can understand those words and it can understand how those words can be manipulated, right?
There was an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where they have what's called a holodeck.
Yeah.
Right? And on this holodeck, I think Data created this program called Professor Moriarty.
I know. Yeah. I love that episode.
Eventually, I loved it because they kept coming back to it and coming back to him, because this holographic program basically became sentient, and this
it learned of itself.
The program was able to change itself and give itself expanded knowledge, and it
was able to manipulate its own hologram, like not itself, but it could manipulate the holographic room. It learned how to leave. It actually it remembered. I remember that was the biggest creepy part, is they just shut it down, and then when they restarted it, he picked up like, what was that? What do you? Why are you like? He knew something was wrong, and they were like, you shouldn't remember that because it was like an anomaly.
To know these things, you shouldn't be able to, and that to me was him manipulating his own metatext.
And that's where it's like, yes, you can modify it, right? Like you can modify that. He would not be able to like change the code of the holodeck. He couldn't change how the holodeck works, but he understood the code of the holodeck and could manipulate it, right? He could change the room he was standing in, but he couldn't change how the holodeck represents that room. Does that make more sense? That's what I mean by it's unchangeable, but it's modifiable. You can work with the holodeck in its code. You can manipulate the code to represent what you want, but you can't change the fundamental code. The code will work as the code is always meant to work.
What it is, and it's still bound by the same rules. Now, you can use those rules to your advantage, if you need to. But in the end of the day, and that was what was very interesting about that particular little, I would call it a mini series.
Because it had a couple episodes.
Yeah, I swear there was like 6 or 7 episodes.
I think there was like 2 or 3 back to back, and then they called back to it in the future.
Very much so. But at the end, I remember like they outsmarted him. Like this dude was like a genius. This dude was like super smart, but they eventually outsmarted him.
They put him in a hologram that's infinite.
He thought that he was like going out and exploring.
They thought they let him go, and all they did was give him a holodeck of the universe.
He's in like a tiny little computer chip that he's off exploring.
And he believes, and that's so cool, right? Like he honestly believes that he's exploring the universe, and he's getting all of the data that is possibly knowable. You know what I mean? And what again? Yeah, such a great episode. Fantastic, like representation, I think. Because if you look at the meta text as the foundational code, the code, like you can write a program to use the bits of its own program to write more code, but you can't have it rewrite its own code because the moment it changed its own code, it would stop working immediately, right? The moment you change a decimal point or a slash in any working code, it's going to stop working. So a computer program can't manipulate its own active code without destroying itself. But what it can do is take bits and pieces and go, but if I put those bits and pieces in this order, I can't change it fundamentally, but I can make that order produce something else, right? And that's what I look at, like, again, I think it's maybe beating the metaphor a little bit too much, but I look at the meta text as literal, like, the D&D books. It is a code that we use to create these worlds, and the best in-game the characters can hope for is to learn how those codes work, but they can't actually fundamentally change the language of the code. They can't stop the code from working. All they can do is manipulate some of the order of it.
It's very interesting because I almost look at it like when, like, say if you know how you were talking about, you got a little bit of Doctor Who, you got a little bit of the Apprentice Adept series, a little bit of the Dresden Files, like all these things, like, you know, you could take the source code for those things, or you could take your adaptation of those things, you know, like the books are the rules as written, right? But in High Point, if you couldn't take the second edition player's handbook and just, it's not a 1-for-1 in High Point. Like, there are edits to it, right, according to this is interesting, is because Zenith is in High Point. Zenith is not manipulating it. He is just the the arbiter of it. You officially decided what's what. You brought it into being. You said, this is what I take from second edition. This is what I don't. This is my version of second edition stuff. This is what isn't. You know, he just kind of finds a way to make it make sense in the world, so to speak.
In a sense, well, because it's also, a lot of this isn't Zenith's doing. Like, he found High Point, and then he brought his own ideas into how High Point grew. The things that exist here, he uses godlike power to create, you know, matter. He created certain planets. He created deities. He's created, you know, all of that, right? Like, he has created a lot, but he isn't necessarily deciding, like, the Doctor Who part. Zenith did not decide that time works like it does in Doctor Who. He doesn't control how, he knows how he can control time, but he can control time in his influence, but he can't control how time operates, right? Like, he knows he can go forward in time, backward in time. He knows he can stop time. He knows if he goes back in time and change something, the forward movement of time will change. But he doesn't get to decide that if I go back in time and change something, he doesn't get to decide that, well, the future won't change if I do that. That's how time works, right? He can't change how time works, but he knows he can manipulate time. That's a big difference between he doesn't get to decide that he gets to go forward and back. He knows he can go forward and back, but he can't decide to go left and right. There's no left and right in time. There's forward and back. Mm-hmm. He can't decide to go up in time. That would be changing the metatext. That would be changing how time operates. He can manipulate it. He can modify it, but he can't change it, if that makes more sense, right? So when he came here, I looked at it as he had a belief of how time worked from where he was from, where he was created in the old empire. When he left, he went through the Cataclysm and met a bunch of NPCs, one of being the Doctor. The Doctor, in my lore for High Point, the Doctor taught him a much more bigger understanding of time. Understood it the way the Doctor understands it. So when he came to High Point, Zenith just had a much more broader understanding of how time operates, how to flow through time, and how changes will affect both past and present. He's not deciding this is how time works. He discovered this is what the metatext says how time works. He just didn't know this is how it worked. It's a different understanding.
So when Zenith found High Point, was it a blank slate?
Mostly, yeah. The only thing that was here was the anomaly. It was a blank slate as in there was a lot of potential. Like, there was the bare bones of the galaxy. It wasn't like just empty void, but there wasn't structure. It was basically like a lifeless galaxy, if you will. It was a galaxy that mirrored ours, but it was all of the unused potential, right? All of the magical of the non-magic, right? So it's like all of the potential was here, but nobody was guiding it. There was no driving force. It just was stagnant. It was here waiting to be ignited. And then once he got here, it was his playground. He got to start making those decisions and doing what gods get to do.
Okay.
Which is also different from the place that he came from, because the lore from where he came from was that when that crystal sphere was discovered, there was nothing. And the individual beget it by pure nothingness. Like, from that the emperor basically started everything in that world. Whereas with Zenith, he inherited this place, but it had nothing. There wasn't like life here. There were no deities. There were the versions of Eternals that maintain crystal spheres, but there was no active entity that had any purpose or plan. It was just, no one knows why the crystal spheres are there. It was just there. This one only happened to be populated because of the anomaly, though. That's the only reason why there was stuff in here, is because the anomaly was here. And again, we don't know if the anomaly was always here, if it was the cataclysm that stopped the anomaly from being here. Even Zenith. That's why I love it, because even I am allowed to be like, Zenith doesn't know. Zenith found High Point. Zenith found this crystal sphere. That's my. So any real.
Does Vortex have lore that Zenith could discover?
Yes. There are things that Zenith does not know that I have to, like how Zenith didn't know time the way that the Doctor did. That was lore Vortex had that Zenith did not. You know, my version of the Eternals. That is lore that Zenith only knows of them and knows what others know of them, but I have lore about them that Zenith doesn't have. So yes, there's much more, like how crystal spheres work. Technically, I have lore that Zenith doesn't know, and what's beyond his, all of that kind of stuff. Definitely a lot more that, yes, I technically would say that Zenith doesn't have all of the same lore, but that's, again, where the metatext comes in. I am my own embodiment of the metatext. He is just learning how to utilize it.
I like it.
I think, like, again, it's not the cleanest, but it's not so convoluted that you can't keep up. I think it makes sense.
I don't think it can really be clean. Like, I think almost by definition, like you said, it is lightweight piecemeal. Even when you go back to what Gary Gygax created, like we were even talking about it the other day. It's like he was pulling a lot of his stuff, like the magic system. What was that called again?
Oh yeah, the Vancian magic system.
That was pulled from another book.
Yeah, a novel series that he was reading, and he thought that
he edited, he made it work for this particular game set. So everything is in at the end of the day going to be a unique adaptation of the one that is using it. Right now, the one that's using it can choose to stay true to every word and every syllable, and like the metatext is their Bible. Like the player's handbook is the Bible of the game, and if it doesn't explicitly say it in the book, if it can be but even then, you can look, there's so many rules lawyers that disagree on what the metatext says and like what is meant by what it said, because in the end of the day, you're going to understand. And to be honest, I get into these topics with just people in general, because like if I say something to you, you might hear it and receive it in one way, but I mean it a completely different way. And the same thing can be true with the metatext of what was written in the rules.
Like,
so,
if you want another example of how I view the metatext, like low key, every spell ever cast, at least by wizards, not by like sorcerers and all of that. But even then, we can talk about that as a subtopic. But essentially, every magic, every spell ever cast, at least by mortals, in my opinion, is like a syllable or a word of the metatext, right? Like the idea of when you cast a spell, it's verbal, somatical, material, right? Which means you hold a material, you do a hand signal, and you say a word. And all of that somehow manipulates the flows of magic and you do spells, right? Well, you know how like they always try to have a hard representation of like when mortals meet gods and they're like, well, what's your name? And you're like, you couldn't understand it. It would take me 5,000 of your years to pronounce one syllable. Like the idea that we just can't comprehend it, right? So a good way of also getting people to understand, like, well, how do you understand the metatext? Why can only a deity understand it? It's like, okay, so cast that spell, do that, say that word while you're holding this item. Cool. Now, do all of that, but verbally. Just don't describe what you did, but in a word, say what you just did. The mortal mind can't, like, what do you mean a word that, like a word that incorporates the fact that I was holding this particular piece and doing this gesture and I said that word and I need to make that into a word. And it's like, yes, if you can't understand how that works, then you can't understand the metatext, right? Because a single word in the metatext would be everything you did to cast that spell. So you're technically, that's why I say when we think of like the metatext is in everything, right? It's in all writing. It is, but like I love the metaphor of pie. It's everything is just a mess if you don't know the patterns that you're looking for. If you're looking at pie, you would never be able to see where fireball is unless you know how to see the code. Oh, that's the metatext version of this item, this word, this hand gesture equals this spell. It's just you can't see the code of the line of metatext because it's not a text. It's not a language you can read. That's why I kind of say it's like fourth dimensional, right? It's like all of those things you did is the metatext, but how do you describe a somatical, movement as text, right? It's a god could understand that.
VSM.
Yeah, so it's like a god can understand how a mortal movement translates into a word. Again, I say this because it's not mortal concepts, but that's where I'm like, I love this idea that you could explain metatext even on the low level of people mess with the metatext all the time. They just don't know it, which is, again, why I like that NPC where a stack of books could mean something completely different to him because it's not just the stack of books. It's what books they are, what materials they're made out of, what letters, what page numbers, what angle they're sitting at. All of those things somehow activate the metatext. And I just kind of like how that's just a very tiny 1% glimpse into a fragment of what the metatext has capable of, right? Because it's not like his spells are changing the world. It's just he's seen, it's like almost like an artificer messing with stuff. He's just seeing that if he manipulates things, he sees a flow of magic that...
It's like a three-dimensional word. Well, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, perfect.
A fourth-dimensional word.
A three-dimensional word is actually a better way to put it because what's a two-dimensional word? Like, words are one-dimensional. It's the word and then it's meaning. That's, to me, one-dimensional. What is a two-dimensional, a three-dimensional word? It would be... Well, and we actually have languages like that, though. Like, there are many languages where, like, I forget what it's like, is it Swahili? Or any, the variations of, like, the click languages, where that's not a word that you're using, but how when you use a click vastly changes things, right? Imagine if like you have other ones where it's like you have other languages where it's more context based. They they don't have as many words as we do. They don't describe things in such detail. You just have to keep up with the context of what you're saying. That's a different type of language. That could be considered a two-dimensional language. One that's not self-explanatory. One that you need context in order to understand.
Yeah. I feel like just in general that's more present than a lot of people realize, like, because so much of the time people are saying stuff even though there may be a clear definition of what something is supposed to mean. People don't always use it that way. People don't always mean it that way. Somebody based upon their own life experience could have a much more expansive definition of what that means versus somebody else having a very more finite definition of what that means.
Well, I mean we even have this too, like like in certain languages, like you take Spanish, for instance, right? You have the formal and informal version. Like, and like we have what we call slang in, English, and we have like, formal words and everything. But something like Spanish has a whole like formal way of speaking. Like the entire language has a formal and informal side. We have formal and informal words, but we don't really have a colloquial difference of what's formal and informal speech. You know how to be professional, but like their whole structure of how they say things, the words that they use, the way that they, pronounce certain words is very directive of like who you're speaking to, right? So imagine tying that concept in also with body language, having to be absolutely aware that there is something akin to formal and informal body language. So it's like all of that, again, tying all of that together is the metatext. All of that combined is what makes the metatext, and that's still not even all of it, right? That's just, again, a very small piece to the larger puzzle that is, the endlessness of pi.
Facts.
So yeah, I don't think we have any real history. That's pretty much it. That is all of the history we know. We know that it has always existed. We know that it is the epitome of all knowledge of the multiverse. So even beyond any individual D&D universe, it is the information of the multiverse, which is why I say it's not just the D&D books, right? It's not just, the metatext isn't just the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook. It's everything, right?
I mean, if there's a universe where, Greek mythology exists, then there's got to be a universe where the DC universe exists.
Well, and think about it. Like and again, we created D&D, right? So even though in D&D Earth exists, if Earth is the progenitor of everything, right? If we are where it all started, then everything we wrote is the metatext, right? So Dresden, if we wrote D&D and D&D believes it's real and believes we're real, then technically Dresden, that universe, is just as real. We wrote it, they believe it exists, D&D believe they exist. So if you think about it, like, again, everything we've written, everything we believe, all of the influences from a D&D mindset, that's why it's that metaphysical concept. From a character's point of view, the meta text is something that a character in D&D couldn't fathom, because it's not the rules for their universe, it is the rules in which we look at to build the universe they're in, right? So it's like, it's all the things. It's not just a rule book. That's why it's like, it's so much more than just a tangible thing. It is a ideology that, again, in pieces like Denier, I can take a D&D player's handbook and go, hey, here's a piece of a meta text. You can use this to run a D&D world. But you also like supernatural and you want to add that in. So you can add that in as well. But this book right here that I'm showing you isn't all of the metatext, but it is a piece of the metatext that's been transcribed that can tell you a bit about a universe, but it isn't all encompassing. So that, like when we were talking about like how Denier would transcribe bits and pieces of it, it's kind of like an in-game version of he wrote a chapter. He got his hands on a chapter or a page of the DMG, and it says, hey, look, it actually says that this is how you can cast a spell. So the meta text has told me how magic works in a way that I didn't know, because I'm being told about it. I don't know. I don't know if I'm maybe just now circling into nothingness, but I don't know. I've always loved these like undefinable terms in D&D. I've always loved these ideas that let me really just play with the intangibility of ideas and just really let my mind kind of create a narrative that I think flows and that I think works.
And I really do believe that's what's important, is because in order for the metatext supposedly to maintain its structure, to maintain the world that it's supposed to be, it has to connect. Like, if at any point it breaks. Like, you try and play in it with characters, with people that give it life, and it stops making sense. It breaks the immersion, and it's not really playable. So at the end of the day, whenever you're putting together your metatext, your rules as written, how your world works, what you want to do for this moment. And imagine like a module somebody is running, like whatever the case may be, even if you want to edit it a little bit or change it a little bit, whatever you're putting together, at the very least, it has to be able to connect in a way that makes sense, I mean, I can't imagine somebody taking a module or taking the rules as written and turning it into something that breaks itself.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because then what are you going to do with it? Like it's not gonna. It has to be something that flows, and so everybody's got a different version of what that looks like, and as long as you stay within certain bounds, as long as you're like in certain video games where you're like not allowed to like go certain places, or just like there's an invisible wall that you can't go to. Like I feel like certain people will do that in their games so that everything makes sense. Like, if I don't have to think about what's over there, if I don't have to pay attention to what that does, then what I'm doing can make enough sense. And so that's, a lot of people call that railroading, but like, it is what it is. It's like, if this is the story that I'm creating, if it goes this direction, if this is the type of game that I want to play, then okay, then that's what you're building, then that's where it goes, and it'll make sense in that narrative, but only in that narrative. And if you want it to be more expansive, if you want to make sense in more worlds and more people's perspective, then you do what a lot of what we try to do, which is make it make sense to enough people so that we can share it, so that it can be. And
I think you're touching on something that it would be good to end with here, because we're past the 3-hour mark. But to end it, that's a good idea too, because again, I've always brought up, like, D&D has told us these vague details, what I believe is for us to fill in, but they've also told us that they do believe in all these locations. They believe that Earth is its own universe in the multiverse. They believe D&D is its own universe. They believe that the Greek pantheon has its own universe, right? So if they believe in all of those separations, right, then in my opinion they also believe in like the equal ownership, right? Those locations have ownership of themselves. And so you have the metatext, which is like the overarching everything, but D&D has shown that every place operates differently. Every crystal sphere has its own rules. It even says magic can operate vastly differently in any crystal sphere, right? So the rules in Toril don't have to be the rules in High Point. It even says different crystal spheres will have different rules. They believe that Earth has no magic. They believe that the Greek pantheon has a completely different set of rules of magic than D&D magic is, right? So if D&D can justify and say, we believe that these places wholly and of themselves exist and have their own rule sets, then that metatext being metaphysical isn't one, in my opinion, isn't one overarching defining body of text. The metatext is on every level. From the character in D&D, it's metaphysical because they don't have the DMG, right? That's metaphysical to them. But it's metaphysical to us because it depends on the TTRPG we're playing. It depends on the narrative that we're spilling. If every single universe in the multiverse operates differently, that means that the metatext we're using for each one is overlapping, but not all-encompassing. Otherwise, we'd all have the same rules, right? D&D would have the same magic as Dresden Files and Doctor Who, but they don't. They all have their own operations. They're all still being told by the same story, right? They're all still being told, so they all have the metatext behind them, but the metatext is completely different in each one. And that's where I say it's like you can't change the metatext, but you can modify it. You can manipulate what the output is, but you can't change the code itself. And that's, I really like that you brought that up, as like every location is going to operate completely differently. And that might be a problem that the D&D community has had for a long time that we've never really addressed. We talk about it loosely, but the idea that people argue what's right and what's wrong, and we're always against that, right? We don't believe in right and wrong, but maybe this is really it. Maybe the reason you and I don't believe in right or wrong is because we believe that everything exists in and of itself. Your realm is a bubble out in the universe. My realm is a bubble out in the universe. We don't believe that we're wrong is because we're still using the metatext the same way. We're still narrating a story. We're still having adventures. We're still making things work. But at the end of the day, we're doing it in completely different ways, and they operate solely independently, just like the Greek pantheon operates independently of, D&D. It's one of those things where it's like, maybe the argument shouldn't be we all need to be in agreement that it works the exact same way. Maybe that's the wrong approach, right? Like, because we've seen that in the D&D community where everyone wants to argue what's correct. And maybe it's not so much there is only one correctness. Maybe it's only correct at the time. Maybe that's the argument we need to make, is who's correct at the time, not who's correct in every situation.
That concept is interesting to me because it makes me feel like like imagine in High Point, you can travel to different realms, different crystal spheres. You know, you technically got to your crystal sphere from Vortex's original crystal sphere, right? So those, at the very least, in your lore, exist in the same dimension, right?
Technically.
And so imagine, like, there are two DMs, and one DM's willing to have their world exist in their dimension, and your players can go over there if you want to, but say that DM doesn't recognize your dimension, like that, your world might not exist in there. It's almost like I can see you, but you can't see me type deal, and it's crazy, but it's at the same time,
it's just like what I'm doing with D&D. My Cataclysm doesn't change D&D lore, but I am using it and modifying it, but I'm also using it with what it said, right? So if, like, you were to run your kids through High Point, you could do that all you want. That's not going to change anything in High Point. High Point will recognize whatever they do. Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, okay, tell me what they did so I can change my universe. But there is nothing stopping you from taking what you know of High Point and running with it, right? Running a campaign. Like you said, can't see me, but I can see you. High Point wouldn't acknowledge anything that they did in your version of High Point, but that doesn't diminish the fact that you ran them through it. Like, I can't take that experience away from them. I can't tell them that's not real. They had the experience, right? That's that mindset of, like, that makes perfect sense, that a pocket copy of something can exist, because again, the meta text has the description of High Point, but you can change that you can modify it without actually changing the text itself. So yeah, it is interesting, but that's also where the choice of, if in my universe, your universe doesn't exist, then that literally has no effect on you. If you want my universe to exist in your universe, I can't stop you. I can't prevent you from doing it. I can ask you not to, but I can't stop you from running Zenith in your realm. Like, you can't stop you from playing Zenith in Cineverse, and deciding what happens. But lore-wise, if those kids come into my world, everything they know about Zenith will be incorrect. Now, how they how they reconcile all of that, not my problem. But that's that whole thing of, just like if you go to a module, you got to forget what you learned in the last module because you're different people, different place, different rules.
Interesting.
But it does go into a deeper conversation. We'll have to have another episode, because there is another one of those things that I stole from my original DM, where you talked about leaving High Point, leaving the Crystal Sphere, possibly going to other realms or other, like, gaming sessions. And I never really figured it out, because I never actually left that one until, my Great Escape. But I never went through his process, because he also had a process where you could leave his realm and go to others. But his process, all I knew was that you would, like, your character would go to fundamental changes. You basically wouldn't be able to just take your character sheet and run with it. Like, he would essentially let you take your character, but modify your character sheet to, I think, a standard character sheet, because he had things that aren't standard. So kind of like what we would do. We would just modify it and take away all of the homebrew stuff and give you what the equivalent is. And then usually when you came back, he would do something akin to the same thing. He would remodify whatever your character was to fit now what would make sense in his realm, right? So you could lose or gain powers by leaving or coming back. So again, I don't know to what extent that was. That's all I really know about it, is that you went to this fundamental change.
Like, an in-game process that you had to go through?
Yeah. It was literally a whole campaign. Like, you would take months. Like, it wasn't just something you just did. It would literally, you had to be in game. You had to go game for it. You had to get authorization. You had to figure out how to do it. You had to go do it. And then I think he described it as basically, because you're leaving, it's kind of like you're literally physically going to a new universe. So things about you change, right? The new universe you go to may not have magic the way that you do here. So you're going to be stripped of all the magic that you know, and you'll be given a new type of magic.
Wasn't there some show that basically went through a bunch of different animation styles of like real shows. Like imagine you start off in like the animation style of like Dragon Ball Z, and then you go into the animation style of like Ed, Ed and Eddie, and then you go into the animation style of like Jimmy Neutron, and you're like literally entering into these different worlds, and you're technically the same character, but imagine.
But your physiology has to change, how you look, how you operate.
That character would get rendered every single time they like show up in a different universe. They're like.
So I loved that idea.
Different.
And I loved that idea. So when it comes to, I would allow someone to take their character either with. I mean, typically if you wanted to do that, I'd still be the DM. Like I'd prefer to be the DM and just take you on a journey outside of High Point, and then we would just have that journey. But like if you wanted to take Dovd for whatever reason, and you found somebody else who was like, man, this game's really cool, and just like, man, Dovd would be like the best character to have in that realm, but you didn't want to just make a character off of Dovd. You wanted to use as much of him as you could, but you also wanted to come back with that experience for whatever reason. I would definitely work on something like that. I haven't really, like, I've never had someone do it, so I've never really had to like finalize that idea, but I do like that idea, kind of like you were talking about. You are fundamentally going somewhere different, so you are going to fundamentally change. Like, you can't just bring a one-to-one copy of who you are. But I do like this idea that it's out there. Like, D&D says you can go, so why would I stop you? Like, why would I stop the adventure if that's where you really wanted to go? Is if you wanted to go to, say, like, Greyhawk, and actually go discover what Greyhawk, the original Greyhawk, would be like. You know, if you found a DM that would run Greyhawk traditionally, and then let you bring in a pre-gen character, maybe we could talk about that, where it could be like, you know, a campaign where Dovd goes away from High Point for a while, goes and adventures in a traditional Greyhawk campaign, and then comes back with that knowledge. I could see that working. It's just, you know, narratively, how do you get out, and then how do you get back?
Mm-hmm. Well, I could hitch a ride on a ship.
If you could find one leaving, you probably could.
I know one that's leaving. Well, I don't know when they're leaving.
Yeah, you don't know when they're leaving. That'll be a while. But that was great. No, I think that was a very well fleshed out. I was not expecting so much to come out of this conversation.
I'm not gonna lie, I was. That's why when we had the what was it called? The like lightning round that we did a while ago, and we had metatext on there. I was like, maybe we should.
Stand by. I mean, I knew we would be able to talk about it, but for 3 hours, I mean, so little information. There's literally like 2 paragraphs or less of information about this, and yet here we are, 3 hours in, 3.5 hours in, doing great. But that is going to be us. Thank you all so much for joining us. This was a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it, but it is getting late. So I think we are going to end it here. We are going to leave you with that. But I do want to thank all of you so much for showing up, for being here. Cosmic, Freeman, Zenshichi. God, that's so difficult to say fast. Thank you all so much for joining us, for hanging out, chatting with us. It's always great to have you guys keeping us company. Yeah, that's going to be us tonight. I will be back on Monday. What is the item? We have the newest one, right? We have from Sama?
Yes. So we have an item from Dez. It is the I hope I'm saying this right. Conversionist?
Conversionist. It's a subclass.
Yes.
This is the Artificer subclass.
I'm actually really sad I'm gonna miss this one. Just like I'm sad I missed Cosmics last time. But
yeah.
It's very interesting. Like putting it together, I had to read a little bit about it. But it very much feels all of this subclass, I will say this is the only little piece I'll give, is it's very construct based.
Ooh, okay.
Like, just imagine, like, what constructs are, and, like, there's a lot of that in, honestly, all 3 of a subclass, 2 Artificer and 1 Warlock, but it's still all construct-based, so...
Okay, I'll look forward to that.
It'll be very interesting to see how it all flows together and see how it works well, but, yeah, right. No, I'm excited to see how they do it, especially because, I believe it was... Who did they say that they were very familiar with? Like, they ran in the same circles as one of our other followers.
Pokeniner.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Pokeniner. So
yeah.
They were super familiar with some of their work. And I was talking to them, as you saw in the Discord earlier, and they have some other stuff that's coming up in the works to be coming through. So
excellent. Well, yeah, so cool. Join me on Monday. I will be here, just me, doing some more... review. It's not homebrew review anymore. It's just review of community creations.
Community creations.
Yeah, so join me on Monday for the first official community creations review, where we will be reviewing this artificer subclass. So that's going to be a lot of fun. As you heard, Kage will not be here on Monday nor next Friday, so it is going to be me rocking solo all next week. But yeah, we will be here on Monday for another review from a community submission. A community creation, and then I will be back next Friday with another topic. I might do another history of, because those are typically easier to do by myself, because I can just sit there and talk about a lot of history, and it's easier than doing these more open-ended conversations.
Right.
So, other than that, I hope you all had a fantastic week. I hope you have a fantastic weekend coming up. We are going to leave you, so thank you guys so much for joining us. If you are on YouTube, go ahead and like, subscribe, leave us a comment about what you guys thought about the meta text. Have you used it? Do you use it? Do you know what it is? Did you learn anything? Let us know. If you want to talk with us offline, you can join the Discord. You can submit topics for us to talk about on Friday. You can submit homebrew review for us to review on Monday, or you can just ask us questions and chit chat with us. So I will drop that in the chat, link to our Discord, as well as if you missed anything earlier in this stream, or if you want to catch any of our other live streams, we have all of those on our VOD channel on YouTube. So I will also post that in the chat as well. Otherwise, stay tuned. We will be posting some new YouTube content here by the end of the month. There will be some changes happening around the Discord. There's going to be some changes happening with the naming schemes. So keep up. Stay notified with us. Stick around, because once we hit affiliate, things will also be changing a lot. So we are excited. Hope you guys are too. Have a great weekend, guys. Cheers.
Deuces, my friends.